Good morning. Good morning. We've got so many things happening we have to visit and sort of sort through before we can meet and talk about it. So I'm glad that we had that chance. We're going to call to order the July 8th, 2016 Board of Directors meeting for the IRL Council. Please stand for a moment of silence. Remain standing for the pledge. Thank you. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If you've looked over the agenda, there are a couple of items that I think it would be useful for us to postpone. We're looking at probably developing a little more broad-based budget, and we'll get SDS to help us do that as well. So we'll postpone that. I mean, you're certainly welcome to make comments when we come to that point, but as far as getting into that in depth, I think we'll postpone that till we have a little different format. Are there any other, let's see, we've got, Chris, yours is in there, okay. You're all right? Are there any other, yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, just for the record, are you talking about 8C?
I'm sorry, I should have been more precise.
Thank you.
And you said 8C?
Yeah, we had 3 items under budget. The last one was just a discussion on fiscal year 16-17. So that was the budget format that we had been talking about.
Yeah. I don't have an 8C. Okay, well, if that's what it is, sure. Let me look at this other agenda, because mine. Sorry, just a second.
No, that's all right. That's why I wanted to make sure we clarified.
I need an update on the agenda. Sorry, is that the only one you have? You got another one?
I have. Here's 8C.
Yeah, no, I see it's not on mine. Okay, yes, it's 8C.
Okay, thank you.
Very much. Any other? If not, do we hear a motion to accept the agenda as revised, please? It's been moved, seconded. Second. It's been moved and seconded. Any other comments? Any in opposition? If not, that's accepted. The minutes have been made available. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes, please? We hear a motion for acceptance of the minutes.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any comments? Any of those in opposition? That's accepted unanimously. We have general public. Are there those of the public that wish to make comment, please? I don't see. Debbie, it's good to see you. We're glad you're here. And if you wish, you certainly may. Okay. Well, it's Representative Mayfield, and we're just delighted that she's here. She's our champion. Are there any? I see no public comments. We then have the water quality update, and Deb, I think, please.
Good morning. Deb Drum, Ecosystem Manager for Martin County. You probably have heard, we're dealing with a major crisis in our area of the Lagoon. Just to give you a brief update, Lake Okeechobee water level is currently at 14.93 feet. That was as of yesterday. And 1 week ago, the lake was at 14.9 feet. It's staying pretty stable and has been for a while. The Corps reduced the weekly average flows to the St. Lucie estuary last week from 1,800 CFS, and that was what the Lake Okeechobee regulation schedule of 2008 had led them to, that 1,800. They've reduced those flows to 1,170 CFS at the S80 structure, and that is continuing. The Corps made the decision yesterday to continue the reduced flows at 1,170 CFS from the lake to the St. Lucie estuary. That was as a result of a request that we've made we actually requested that they close the gates at the S80 to try to ameliorate the conditions that are creating the blue-green algae throughout the entire St. Lucie estuary. And we call it unprecedented because it's also occurring out on our beaches, which we have never seen before. So we do have the Microcystis aeruginosa, blue-green algae, cyanobacteria that has the potential to have toxins out on our beaches at this point. We have been assessing the beach conditions on a daily basis with Ocean Rescue to make an indication of whether or not the beaches are closed or open. They do that based on the visible algae at the beaches, and if algae is visible, we are flying double red flags, which indicates that the waters are closed and there is no access to the waters. The current flows into Lake Okeechobee were approximately 4,200 CFS, and the outflows were about 3,000 CFS. The lake, under those conditions, is expected to slowly rise. The lake level is at least 2 feet more. The current level is at least 2 feet more than what the Army Corps of Engineers would like to see this time of year, especially moving into or being in the hurricane season. The salinities in the estuary are ranging from about 2 parts per thousand up to just above 12 parts per thousand. We've seen a slight increase in salinities in the estuary since the flows from the lake have been reduced. And as a result, from our partners at the Ocean Research and Conservation Association, or ORCA, with those reduced releases to the estuary, the water quality monitoring stations in the middle of the estuary are showing that increase in salinity and a decrease in dissolved oxygen. So although that the increase in salinity will kill the Microcystis algae, those dying cells will likely result in a release of more toxins. The toxin is called microcystin, and it could also you could expect that the depressed oxygen levels as the bacteria consume the dying cells. So it sounds like the conditions are going to potentially get worse before they get better. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service reported this week that they anticipate significant fish kills in our area related to the reduced oxygen levels with algal blooms. And yesterday, we saw the first evidence of that. There were 13 dead fish, including sea trout, mullet, and pinfish at Layton Park, observed by the Old Palm City Bridge. As related to the algae toxicity, FDEP has been doing the tests, as has FWRI. The algae toxicity have mostly been lower than the 10 micrograms per liter, which is the World Health Organization drinking water standard, but there are some important exceptions, ranging from 12 to 414 micrograms per liter. The high toxicity number of 414 was determined from a sample taken at Bathtub Beach, which is one of our community's most popular beach destinations. That sample was taken on June 30th. Martin County is contracted out to collect samples at additional locations at our own expense just to get more information and verify what the conditions are. We've taken those samples at Sandspit Park, North River Shores, Layton Park, Central Marina, and Bathtub Beach. And the toxicity results of those samples will be shared on the county website once they're available. We're hoping those results will be available today. That's the best case scenario, and we will keep everybody apprised. We are hoping, if not, maybe Monday. FDEP continues to post results on their website, www.dep.state.fl.us, and they have a button on the right of that website that says algal blooms, and you can go directly to the results for South Florida, and it shows you all the samples that have been taken, the locations, and what the toxicity results have been. We have, through a resolution, Martin County has requested very specific assistance from the state of Florida to assess alternative treatment or remediation technologies to remove algae from areas where it has accumulated in thick mats. Some of the high toxicity areas that we've seen have been in areas of still water where the prevailing winds have pushed the algae into these basins. It accumulates. We've seen mats up to 9 inches thick, and it has a horrible stench. I can't really even describe it. All I can say is it stays with you for a while. And so we are looking at looking for some assistance from DEP to help us assess what we could possibly do in those areas where we have residences and businesses and public areas where those mats have accumulated, and we are concerned about what the health effects could be. We are relying on DEP to attest to the safety and efficacy of any technology that may be used, and also looking to them to ensure regulatory compliance for the process itself and the disposal of the algae. If FDEP can assure those things, Martin County has said that we would absolutely stand behind them and support on doing a pilot test to try to do all that we can for our community. We are prepared to assist DEP with outreach and communications, and we're coordinating with land and business owners on any pilot studies that are contemplated to negotiate access to those properties and get landowner approval to facilitate. Martin County is also in the process today, we've been working on this for about a week, to request quotes for air quality testing of hydrogen sulfide at 3 to 4 locations throughout the county where the blue-green algae is accumulated, and where I've said that we have those air quality concerns given the smell that's coming off of the decomposing algae. Further testing for other parameters such as toxins in the air is also being requested through DEP. The sampling for toxins in the air, this has the ability to get inhalated through air, and so we're looking to get the toxins measured. That's a much more complicated measurement, and it's a specialized process, and we're asking for state support to follow up on that kind of testing. The algae can affect the public through ingestion or inhalation, and that's true for pets as well. Livestock, wildlife, anything that is ingesting the water can have immediate, as we understand from some of the experts, it could have acute or accumulated impacts. As part of our resolution, we've also done some special requests to the Fish and Wildlife Commission that as they retrieve dead animals from the estuary, specifically manatees and dolphins, if they're getting those animals and performing necropsies, we've requested that they do an analysis on the liver of those animals, as this particular toxin has a tendency to accumulate in the liver of animals, and we're trying to understand if that was a factor in those deaths. We had one dead manatee last week. It was decomposed beyond any ability for FWC to do the necropsy and to get any kind of information from it. The organs were not intact, and so they could not get those samples. But as we move forward, we have requested that that be part of the regular procedures for the necropsies. So we are in dire straits right now. Although our salinities are improving, the toxicity levels could increase because it does kill the algae. Our temperatures in the estuary right now are ranging from 88 to 91 degrees Fahrenheit. That is one of the main factors. That plus fresh water plus high nutrients are the perfect storm, as you are all aware of having these algae blooms, of really supporting the continuation of that. Of particular alarm is that satellite imagery of Lake Okeechobee is now indicating that a blue-green algae bloom in excess of 200 square miles is occurring in Lake Okeechobee as we speak. And so that is a factor as water continues to be released to the estuaries, both Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie, that with the warm temperatures, continued freshwater inputs, and nutrients that are typically there in both estuaries, that we will be looking at a prolonged situation with the algae bloom on both coasts. I don't have any good news. And so with that, I will answer any questions that you have.
Deborah, what was the website again for
The DEP?
algae? Yeah, the algae
So
website.
it's www.dep.gov. www.state.fl.us, and on that home page, you'll see a button on the right-hand side of that page that says algal blooms, and you go in there, and it does provide a couple of different options, and if you just scroll, a pretty easy to understand place where it says South Florida monitoring data. If you click on that and scroll down, you see the entire, since May, they've been taking samples on Lake Okeechobee where the blooms were first seen, and you can look at all of the sampling results. Early on, they had very few samples that resulted in the identification of a dominant taxa of algae. But since then, you can see all the different locations and places where they have gotten very high hits. A hit of 414 micrograms per liter on our beaches is extremely concerning. And so we are still working with DEP and the Department of Health to get some guidance and assistance on how that data should be interpreted and how we should be using that in our decision-making process.
Chris, you have?
I would just like to add that in St. Lucie County, we've, for the first time in the history of St. Lucie County, closed our beaches to the south, all the way north to Waveland Beach. We were also seeing a backup of fresh water coming up as far as Nettles Island. Reports of algae and fish kills are occurring also that far up in the lagoon. And it's largely because of the amount of volume, excuse me, got a little loud there, the amount of volume that is coming into the estuary. And so without the tidal flow and without the ability to push the water out, it's backing up into the lagoon. So we're going to continue to see that domino effect further up in the lagoon. We also have had reports of the algal die-off on our beaches as it dies off and flows to the north, and I also understand to the south, it's been found on the beaches as well. So it is, again, concerning, and there's just very little good news. So.
The problem that we're seeing on the beaches is that the algae will be there 1 hour, and the next hour it'll be gone, and then it'll come back, and so it's very flashy. And we did have, I forgot to mention, yesterday we had at Hobe Sound Beach, we had a massive die-off of mole crabs, also known as sand fleas, or sea fleas, or sand fleas, and that was observed on the beach. We had our contractors attempt to collect the dead crustaceans, and we are attempting to have them attested for toxicity. It is currently unknown whether the collected animals will be able to be tested if there was enough of the tissue that they needed, but we are looking into that. Mole crabs have, in the literature, you'll see that they do have a sensitivity to toxins, and so there are a couple of toxins and acids that we are having them tested for, if possible. We'll continue to look at those kind of effects when you see animals, and we're, again, doing all that we can to better understand something. This is uncharted territory for us. There's so much that we don't know. And so it makes it extremely difficult to incorporate. We don't have any procedures in place. We don't have any response in place that is a tested and tried and true response. So we're really doing the best we can, and it's requiring a lot of effort on a lot of different levels of government to try to input into that process.
Just want to add final thoughts. Number one, have you reached out to Harbor Branch? They had done many years of testing on algae as actually to create biofuels. So I think their experience would lend some, information to us. You talked about being able to remove some of the huge mats that are there. We do know that there are floating devices that actually can take up like sea lettuce and things like that. And maybe there's an opportunity to do that. I would hope that the individual operating the machine will be well protected with respirators and so on. But handling and dealing with the actual material, if it can be collected, is going to be incredibly important. And hopefully Harbor Branch has at least some experience in their algal experiments and science to at least offer some indication to you. And then lastly, it was not long ago, I think we had this conversation just 3 years ago, a local scientist who formerly of St. Lucie County's mosquito control district had hypothesized the idea of pumping water from hypersalinity water out of the FPL power plant into the lagoon to create a back pressure also to add salinity and oxygen to the water. And most recently, FPL has created a conduit that is 14 miles long continuously. And I'm wondering if some combination of a mosquito control pump connected to that conduit could actually force water down the lagoon, hypersalinated water with additional oxygen to kind of at least push and create some additional back pressure. It's never been done. I don't even know if there's been a hypothesis or a paper or a white paper done on it, but doing nothing's not an option. And we've got to try and save the southern part of the lagoon. Even in the northern part of the lagoon had the same similar situation with your major fish kill. So creating temporary solutions and finding the science that goes along with that, I think is incredibly important for us all.
So what I can say to that is that we have reached out internationally and nationally to every single research institution. We are getting calls of support because this has gotten national media attention. We've gotten calls from all over the place with for assistance and on sampling and on lab analysis and on ideas. And so Martin County has been fielding a number of calls from different companies and technologies. We have a list of probably at this point about 30 entities that say that they have potential technologies that can assist us. Some of them are chemical, some of them are mechanical. The aqueduct idea has been thrown out there as well. And so, again, we specifically in our resolution have requested assistance from Florida Department of Environmental Protection to help assess all of those things for regulatory compliance. And as a technical idea, one of the ideas, as an example, was to put a copper algicide in the water, and obviously that's not something that would be allowed. That would create, we're really conscious of not creating more environmental problems with something that would fix one environmental problem at the expense of another. That's just not something that we can do. And so we are going through that list. We are talking through that list with DEP, very active in the last couple days. They've really been engaged to help us sort through. The Water Management District got 5 calls from other companies that weren't even on our list. So we're compiling our all of that information. We're going to put a technical team together to exclude those options that just regulatorily aren't an option, and go through and see. You know, I know that we're pursuing some mechanical pilot testing, having those conversations to see what we can do. And so that all needs to be vetted. And that is what we are doing right now. And we are getting great support from the research institutions locally and nationally. We're talking about the need for long-term monitoring for something like this to better understand how this affects coral reefs, how it affects endangered species, how it affects commercially very important to the nation. The southeast, fishery of grouper and snapper is supported by the St. Lucie estuary, as indicated by Dr. Grant Gilmore's work. So what are the costs of something like this? We need to better understand that, and your points are very well taken. And I do assure you that we are pursuing every single option that we can.
I would just to remind, the BP oil spill comes to mind. Spraying the surface water and having the oil actually sink to the bottom was not a good answer. We still see today, and has been documented, that the oil still rolls around in the Gulf in large clumps. And so let's take a lesson learned there too. So,
Any other questions for Ms. Strobe? She has prepared her last night or yesterday, so I don't know. They all sort of merged, but I'm not sure exactly
No
when.
day and night anymore.
And we have access to that. Kathy, I don't know if you do, but it went, she's got, or to Deb's report.
I will forward this report to Kathy, Frank, and Dwayne right now.
Then Kathy, then you can distribute, because I'm sure that would be interesting and useful to every member, and then the public might have, and so email, so it'd be available.
I'll do that now.
Second, please, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I will forward that now to them.
Everglades Foundation has established a prize of $10 million for anyone that meets their criteria of solving the algae problem. So that ought to get a lot of folks to give submissions, and we will be delighted to see how that works out.
You just tripled my call volume.
No, it's not us. We didn't do it. It's Everglades Foundation that's offering this. I'm sorry. I didn't mean
So
to do that.
it's quite all right. If we can get a solution in place, we're all in.
Remember, it's Everglades Foundation that has offered the prize. So they're the ones that want the submission of the information.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wish you did well.
Thank you.
Dr. Jacoby, please, sir, are you? Yes, sir.
Good morning, Chuck Jacoby from the St. Johns River Water Management District. I guess I have quieter news, which is different for the northern part of the lagoon recently. But I guess the way to describe what's going on further north is the conditions are patchy. Much like was reported, water temperatures are climbing and are pretty high most places. Salinities vary as you in the north, again, where there are fewer tributaries. You're getting higher salinities building up as you get the evaporation of water and the salts are left behind. Further south, when you come down and you start to get O'Galley River and so forth, you get salinities that can be down in the teens. So, again, we're having this kind of mix of the summer conditions. I guess you'd think of this as what you tend to see in the summer. And in fact, there looks as if there was one of the more typical blooms for the summer, which is the pyridinium, which is the dinoflagellate that gives you the bioluminescence that everyone enjoys going out and paddling through and so forth. And we haven't seen that in some of the past summers. It does look as if there's still some brown tide around, mixed in with some other things in most places, so not brown tide dominated in a lot of places. Mosquito Lagoon is a place where things have been bubbling along for well over a year now, and they still continue to do that. Once again, in the old days when we got around 20 micrograms of chlorophyll per liter, that was when we began to look at it as a bloom. And now when things fall below 50 or 60, people are going, well, it's better. So, we're watching that shifting baseline concept, trying to keep that from becoming the dominant theme. In the northern IRL, again, there's some evidence of blooms there. Further south you go, the better it gets. So Secchi depths can go where there are patches. They're sort of in the, say, half a foot, but then they go to, say, 2, 3, 4 feet in some places. So again, different conditions in different places, hard to track as a whole. The good news about that is that, again, even given the warm water temperatures and so forth and so on, if we don't get a consolidated bloom, we may not have the same problem with a massive fish kill that we had in March. Again, one of the things that probably made that fish kill so extensive was the fact that we had the bloom so intense over so large an area, there's very little place for fish to escape. When oxygen conditions drop over that large an area that quickly, they can't run and hide, as it were. Further south you come is even better. Secchi depths over 3-4 feet. Seagrasses are there. Seagrass transects have been undertaken, but they're very sparse. So seagrasses have taken another hit, as it were, but they haven't given up the ghost yet. Unfortunately, satellites, given the weather conditions, are pretty much been clouded out. So satellite imagery has not been very helpful in the recent month or so. That's all I have for you today.
We have questions for Dr. Jacoby? Questions?
I just want to thank both you and Deborah for all the great news you've given us.
Yeah, right.
I want to emphasize, I'm being sarcastic, it's tragic what's going on. You guys and all of us feel very helpless. You're doing all you can, but it seems like it's like the perfect storm.
Well, it is a battle, and again, I think the lagoon's fighting as hard as it can, but it is definitely rocky, and certainly the northern part since 2011 has been a little bit iffy, as it were. So.
I have a question, if you don't mind. I know that there's been some thought to this, and I don't know if anything has really happened about it, but there was some thought to starting to use drones to fly the lagoon, and that seems to be a very good way to detect problems and detect them early, because they have sensitive instruments and could do that, and can fly back and forth almost incessantly and spot problems as they occur, and that may well be helpful to help determine exactly what the cause is, but certainly it would be helpful to give us an idea of where to concentrate. Are we any closer to getting that kind of technology?
I personally am involved with about, I'd call it, say, 3 attempts to sort of improve our ability, one, to detect and track blooms, but also one of the efforts is to go back in time and see if we can use satellite imagery, archived satellite imagery, particularly Landsat, which has been around for quite a while, to use that to try to determine hot spots and hot moments, so places where blooms seem to originate, and the times that they originate, what were the conditions involved with that. The NEP just recently, yesterday or the day before, I think, closed a contract with the Indian River State College to begin some work with essentially a portable spectroradiometer, so something that measures spectra, which is what the satellite imagery measures. So that at a local level, I think the DEP is going to have a test coming up in a few weeks. One of the folks that works with me will go to the test, and that was a drone approach. I think one of the challenges about drones is the field of view, as you might call it, right? So, you need to get pretty high to see large expanses. They certainly provide very high resolution images and so forth now, but it's a trade-off in terms of, how far you go and how much detail you get. So we're looking at trying to combine all the different technologies.
I understand, and if you could get the overall and then send them back in to pinpoint the specific problems and be able to locate those really very quickly, then that might give us some idea as to what's going on and what areas needed to be attacked and be attacked to be attacked rather quickly. I know nothing is as simple as it sounds, but it does sound like it is sort of the wave of the future for this kind of evaluation.
Yep, I mean, we're looking to technology to help us, as much as possible. Once again, a lot of this technology needs to be pinned to the sort of on-the-ground measurements that we've been taking for decades. The satellite images that I bring here off and on, and with the modeling of the chlorophyll levels, we found that that modeling tends to wander off if it's not pinned to some actual values. So, it'll be a balance of things, as you pointed out. And we're definitely looking to try to bring technology to bear on these issues.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
What are the current conditions at the location on the Banana River where the fish kill occurred? And were the events following the fish kill, did it play out as you thought? And then do we expect that there could be more problems there? Or was that kind of a, walk me through the follow-up from March till now?
So the fish kill was concentrated in Banana River Lagoon. Banana River Lagoon, particularly the brown tide concentrations, rose very rapidly and got very high throughout all of the Banana River Lagoon. Then we had a couple of days of cloudy weather, which reduced the photosynthetic production of oxygen, so oxygen levels started to drop. And again, you probably get this combination of factors interacting to get a synergy, as it were. And so oxygen levels started to drop. That probably depressed some of the algal growth, and then they started to die, and the oxygen levels dropped further. And so what you had, from what we can tell, and again, the records are from particular places, was a fairly widespread drop in oxygen concentrations down below 2, in many cases down below 1 for over 8 hours. And that's where fish were going to struggle. If it's a short-term drop over a small area, they either move or they'll survive. But if it's a deep drop over a large area, there's no place for them to go. There's also some evidence in the literature that the brown tide itself may exacerbate the effect of low oxygen. When it's stressed, particularly, it secretes a mucus, so it'll stick to the fish's gills, making them less efficient. So once again, it may have been this combination of, what the alga was that was in the bloom and the fact that the oxygen levels dropped.
So have the conditions returned to normal, or are they on their way back, or are they still
Conditions are still a little iffy. different parts of Banana River Lagoon are exhibiting different conditions at the moment. So it seems in the center, that's where there seems to still be a reasonable amount of brown tide. This was just this week. But a little further north is a little better, and a little further south it's a little better. There is some drift algae that showed up in, say, Newfound Harbor, and again, we're looking at drift algae to be something that competes with the phytoplankton, with the things like brown tide in terms of taking up nutrients. So that's, again, another help, as it were.
Good, thanks.
To whatever degree it's coincidental, I don't know, but maybe you guys are looking at that as far as the longer period of fairly warm winter and the longer period of rain, that we've unusual period, and however all of those interrelate to the things that have happened up north. I don't know, they certainly interrelate what happens to us, because in that fills the light to levels that we aren't accustomed to. So.
Yes, the driver of a lot of what we have is not such a large, slow-moving target, I'm afraid, but definitely the combination of a warm, fairly wet winter and a continuing warm summer. The rainfall seems to have been quite patchy, so parts of the lagoon haven't really had that much rainfall, but other parts have had tremendous rainfalls. I mean, Vero Beach has had a lot of rain. You go further north and it doesn't seem to be as wet. So.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. In Mosquito Lagoon, though, the brown tide does seem to be on the rise. I was down there about 2 weeks ago, and there wasn't that much, but I understand that there's a lot down there now.
Yes.
I know that this is a question you're probably not going to be able to answer, but what is the deal in Mosquito Lagoon? There are not that many outfalls in Mosquito Lagoon. There are septic tanks, certainly. But where does that come from? I mean, does that come from the salinity of the water, or what? And how does the salinity adjusted in Mosquito Lagoon, which is primarily closed off other than Haulover Canal? Groundwater.
Yes, so Mosquito Lagoon will have what we term a long residence time. So anything that gets into Mosquito Lagoon will stay there a while. And so a lot of what we're seeing now are probably nutrients that are cycling. And again, once again, these particularly small phytoplankton, like the brown tide, which is really quite small compared to some of the other things that we saw bloom in the past. Diatoms and dinoflagellates are much larger. The smaller ones cycle nutrients much faster. So when they die, the nutrients are made available and taken up by the next cells more rapidly than they are for some of the larger things. And in fact, the brown tide may be what's termed mixotrophic. So it may actually be able to pull the nutrients that are there off carbon molecules, which typically bacteria have to do, so there's an extra step in the process. The brown tide may be able to do that itself, which again increases cycling. So right now, I think what's going on in mosquito is we built up nutrients, we had the bloom, and it's just cycling its way through, and if it spins down, it'll just take time to spin down, because each cycle you lose some of those nutrients, but it takes a long time.
And would you say those nutrients come from our septic tanks or from runoff, or where do you think that would come from?
I mean, again, most likely a combination of multiple things. You're right in saying that, there are not a lot of large tributaries draining, a large watershed, so the drivers are likely to be close to the lagoon there. Septic tanks should be one of them, sure.
In talking to the Central Florida Central Florida Regional Planning Council, they are firm believers that if we were to sweep our streets, that would make a significant difference. Have you taken a look at that as a possibility?
Street sweeping is certainly one of the things that is in almost all of the basin management action plans as a tool for reducing inputs. Street sweeping probably is particularly useful for some phosphorus, because it tends to bind to particles. So if you can get the particles out before they get in the lagoon, that would help. Nitrogen tends to be a little more soluble in water, so it's a little harder to sweep up. But yeah, street sweeping is certainly one of the tools that's useful, I think. Anything that keeps particles and terrestrial materials out of the lagoon will, in the long run, help.
Yeah, I don't see Barbara from DEO here at the moment, but there is a report, and I have a copy. I don't know if that's available for the council. If not, we'll make sure that becomes available for the council, but it deals with various activities that we, counties, cities might do to reduce the amount of contaminants that are going into the waterways. And that was one of them, and I was terribly surprised about the validity of street sweeping on a fairly regular basis, how much that was beneficial. So that
And
was
very cheap.
So I'll try to make a copy and try to get that back to you guys. Are there other questions for Dr. Jacoby, please? Thank you, sir. We do have item number 6. Dwayne, was that one you were, how are we going to do that one?
Last week at the St. Lucie Board of County Commissioners, there was interest in having the council address the emergency orders that have come about both at the local, state level and requests to the federal level. So we wanted to make an opportunity for the council to have a discussion about the, emergency declarations that are in place and to see, if you had any direction to staff as we move forward. So this is an open discussion item for you all related to the council's either involvement or acknowledgement or support of current emergency conditions.
Let me, and then Chris, of course you probably are full well aware that it's pedal to the metal kind of a thing for us, and we've been pushing it as hard as we can in every direction that we can, and so there is an emergency declaration for the county. We have solicited and received that declaration from the state, which was, in our view, quite useful in that it then gave impetus to reduce the flows of waters coming out of the upper Kissimmee Basin. And that was extremely useful in reducing the pressures that were on the lake. We are still awaiting the declaration from the president. He's been approached by the governor and by various others, and several of our federal congressional members and senators. So there's a number of efforts being made to have that declaration in the hopes, candidly, in the hopes that that would direct Army Corps to shut the gates. That's for whatever, that's the hope. So that's what we have been engaged in. We're very appreciative, and St. Lucie has come in, and they've been very supportive, and Chris, you're certainly welcome to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. St. Lucie County engaged and supported the state of emergency along with Martin County, and have encouraged and reached out to Lee County to become part of that as well. I wanted to raise it here since we all have similar situations along the lagoon, whether it be the North Fishkill or all the way in the south with the discharges. As part of that, a number of ideas have come through. Of course, looking at in your packet, you'll see the letters that we have drafted and have sent off to the state and the federal government, including a request of the president to come to the location personally to understand what's exactly happening. Some of the things that have been brought forward is demanding a change in the lure schedule that has come through state requests. The other is the C23, C24 canals that actually also support and provide input into the lagoon south could be utilized, and a number of acres has already been purchased by the state and supported by St. Lucie County to possibly use those properties that are already used or owned, I should say, to pump water out of those canals to reduce the flow into the southern part of the lagoon. It's been stated in this arena for several years now that the single most important local effort could be the C23, C24 reservoirs creation and the possibility of increasing and utilizing the 10 Mile Creek Reservoir as a cleansing cell to remove as much input from the St. Lucie County Basin into the southern part of the lagoon. So as part of the state of emergency, we're requesting federal action and funding that may speed forward and through South Florida Water Management District, the state, and some discussion with the federal government to see if a match could occur to speed forward, even in the short term. I think it's been indicated from the water farming side to berm up already fallow agricultural lands to remove water from the system. Since we already own collectively between South Florida and St. Lucie County a number of acres out west, I think that that should be something that should be considered. Now, when I asked about having the conversation here with the NEP, is that, you know, from a policy standpoint, can we step out and create a resolution supporting the science side of these efforts, removing additional water from the system, removing additional contaminants from the system, because if there's no support to move the water south, then we've got to do other emergency efforts today. But from a policy standpoint, from the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program, I think we have the scientists, we have the organization now that gives us an opportunity to support, from a resolution standpoint. Yes, hundreds of scientists have said move the water south, and that's going to be the solution. End of the story. However, until there's political will to do that, we've got to be able to use the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program to support from the science side, saying that if these efforts are done, this can happen. But we've got to ask for resolutions from the state and federal government, and I think because there's so much science and there's so much of an organizational structure now with the NEP, we can actually have more of an impression upon our state and federal officials. That's what I wanted to bring forward. You have our letters. I think it would be nice if the rest of the lagoon cooperated and supported those resolutions of the state of emergency. We continue to have the issues in the north part of the lagoon. Fort Pierce is only going to be probably the savior of the rest of the lagoon, whether it's through creating a new fishery, creating the ability to raise new fishes. Somebody talked about the grouper and the snapper and so on and so forth. We're very fortunate to still have a part of the lagoon that's well. The C-25 is incredibly, it's pumping so much now into Fort Pierce. We've got to change that mechanism too, because if we continue to kill the so-called golden goose that's going to save the lagoon after all this is done, we've got a bigger problem. So I made a lot of statements, a lot of comments. I would like support from the NEP to support the science side with the resolution and proclamations, whatever is necessary to support the state of emergency so we get additional attention. We've got the scientists, we've got the entity in place, and we certainly have the minds at the table to make that happen.
I think the essence of what we're discussing at the moment is there's no question but what the lagoon is imperiled. In the south end, we feel that we're totally endangered. In the north, it's a growing type problem that alternates. Sometimes it's not quite as bad as others. Sometimes it's totally catastrophic. What we're considering, and that's why it's here, is to consider, is that how does the council what does the council want to do that we could be consistent in doing, and that we would not set some kind of inappropriate precedent that would allow others to feel that particular projects or particular activities might be appropriate for the group to lend weight to. But what I think, and of course I'm totally agreeing with you, you know that, is that we're looking at the lagoon as a whole. And so what would be appropriate for us to do then as the council? It seems it would be most appropriate for us to recognize the current state of this devastation, both to the south and to the growing imperilment in the north. so, but that's what's on the table here at the moment, or under the discussion, because there are perhaps different perspectives.
Well, you know, we do have our problems in the north, but again, they are cheaper, and I really don't know what the cause is. I would assume it is the septic tanks, which is considerably less expensive than what you have down south. It is pennies on the dollar in comparison, but it is still too much for the Volusia County and the cities up there to handle. With a very little bit of money, in the grand scheme of things, you could probably fix Mosquito Lagoon and declare victory and then move on, which is nice. It's nice to have a milestone. But still, somebody's got to get serious about Lake Okeechobee, because we on the northern end know full well that if you guys have a problem down south, that is going to migrate forward, that, you know, we might be able to do some sort of invasive species sort of barrier at Haulover Canal, but, you know, those things are hit and miss propositions. You got boats going through. You don't know what's attached to the hull, and you know, they'll get through, and you can't stop it. You know, you can slow it down maybe, but you really can't stop it. And I guess even though we are up in this area that is kind of isolated with smaller problems than everyone else, we do realize the interconnectedness with everyone else, and we want to see you guys be successful in the replumbing of Lake Okeechobee. I do think it is absolutely critical, and we are we rather need to focus on that issue. I do realize it's going to be expensive, but what we will wind up doing is spinning our wheels on a whole lot of inconsequential things if we don't tackle that issue down there. And on our side, we have some issues that are considerably cheaper and that could be taken care of, that a victory could be declared. We can at least say, we did something, we fixed this one. Now we're moving on to the other ones. But again, we really do need to build the political support to do what's necessary for Lake Okeechobee. It's absolutely critical. And the Kissimmee River, absolutely critical, got to be done.
This is up for discussion, so you'll get your chance. Everybody will get a chance. I think what we're talking about doing is trying to even issue a resolution of support, seeking the ongoing support from the federal government at their various levels, the state government and the agencies at the various levels, to address the contamination sources and the consequences.
Right.
That's, yes, Okeechobee is horrific for us, but there are all these other sources. That's what we're going to have to realize. That's what we got to grapple with to get this lagoon back on the basis of restoration.
Indeed, you're right.
Is the sources of these contaminants. And Lake Okeechobee is an enormous source, but there are these other sources as well. And so I would encourage us to consider a resolution from this group, if it's appropriate. That's why we're checking to see if we think it's appropriate, that would address the strong request for support at the federal level, at the state level, at the various agency levels to address the contamination sources and the consequences.
And the great thing, I don't want to monopolize, but the great thing everybody knows is that the lagoon itself does not drain that wide of an area. And so given that, without the canals, and given that factor, it is a fixable lagoon all the way down. It can be done. This isn't something that is pie in the sky. It can be done. You know, and we all know what needs to be done to move it along. We might disagree, or the science may tell us different priorities than what we think in our mind right now. You know, we think we know, but, you know, maybe it turns out we don't. Maybe the science shows us something different. But it's just, we know what the basic problems are. We just need to get working on them.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I think there's two things. I think from an awareness standpoint, the whole world is aware of what's going on. So I don't know what a resolution bringing additional awareness to it. We've got their attention. Commissioner Zadowski, I think you were on the right track when you started identifying those specific projects. And I think for us, we've always talked about being action-oriented and identifying those problems, because you're right, it's doable. You mentioned the Kissimmee River. There's no better example of can we do it when you look at how that system has responded to the restoration work that's been done, but it's not finished. About 15% needs to be completed, so we can do it. So I think for this group, especially where we are at this point in our young history, yeah, I'm all about, a resolution, but I wanted to call out the specific resources that are needed to allow us to put those resources to work immediately. We got everybody's attention now. We got to give them something to do with it specifically.
Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up
Yes,
on
please.
If you'll review the letter we drafted to the administration, the federal administration, it has 9 called out items. It could be more. This was just something that we created in cooperation and support of Martin County, but certainly identifying projects and things. Again, if the argument from our state officials is that the federal government hasn't ponied up their half of the 50-50 split on what to do with Lake Okeechobee, maybe that could be defined so that the state officials would feel more comfortable moving forward with action on Lake Okeechobee. The other is, if that list is sufficient, maybe we could add that into a resolution so that the federal government understands exactly what we're trying to accomplish in all the different areas. Because we have been an impaired waters entity for 25 years, the EPA knows the problems we face, and in this case, we do need federal assistance to go along with what the citizens of this state have approved in Amendment 1, attempting to try and find the funding and give our political folks some cover for spending money in the state to make statewide improvements. So if you look at that draft, actually that's a letter we have already sent and approved, but if this entity could support that with, as stated, clear definitions of items that need to be addressed short-term, mid, and long-term, I think it gives us, the federal government, an opportunity to have Congress review through the Word bill, which is coming up. And I will be going to Washington, D.C. Next week to meet with a number of officials, including the Army Corps and Congressman Murphy and others, to discuss what could and should be in the Word bill. So having support from the NEP with defined outlines of projected results, return on investment, cost of proposals, and how the federal government could support us, I think is something we should do sooner than later.
Please.
From a timing standpoint, well, a couple things. Number one, I want to be convinced that, the effort of pulling a resolution together does something, and I want to understand that, first of all. And then secondly, rather than draft something up here on the fly, I was just made aware of it last night. I'd like to work with Dr. DeFries and kind of spell out specifically what those projects are. So if we do come together as one voice for this lagoon, that we're handing them a list, a specific list, again, rather than draft something on the fly here as we go. I'm all on board there, but I want it to have some bite. I want it to have some teeth. I want it to have some meaning. That's my suggestion.
I think that has strong validity. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I agree with Kevin that we have an opportunity to be smart here. Lake Okeechobee's been eutrophic for 4,600 years and has seen a lot of issues, but even before ag surrounded the southern part of that lake. Rome wasn't built in a day, and this issue took years to surface. It's a new beast. We've got an issue that's been coming at us for a long time, and we need to be smart because we got national attention, and we should have it. We need to be thoughtful about what we can ask for on this lagoon, because I think you're going to see a lot of support. And I agree with Kevin that we need to ask very thoughtfully from the north end of the lagoon to the south end, and make sure that we're asking for the right changes. Because I know of a few things that I'm urging my board to do to help. One is to reconnect the two districts and allow water to go north-south, like it used to historically. West of I-95, it used to flow north, and hundreds of billions of gallons went north that now goes east-west. Big mistake. But I think Kevin's spot on. Let's make this, with Dr. DeFries and some other people's help, craft a smart ask that pinpoints exactly our top thoughts on making this a better lagoon as soon as humanly possible, while we got this attention, while we're going to see federal support. I think a lot of the letter of St. Lucie County is probably most of what we want to ask for, but there's some other things we want to include. And so I think Kevin's right on the money. I would urge you to slow down, work with Dr. DeFries and a couple other people as quickly as we can in crafting a letter to be circulated to this board for our approval.
Please.
Yeah, I would just like to reiterate what you're saying and what the rest of this board has said. I spent some time in Washington, D.C. last month, and I met directly with Senator Rubio and Senator Nelson and the Corps of Engineers, and they're ready, willing, and able to help us. They want to help. So if we're specific with our asks, and we give them a blueprint of what we need, what we look for, and where we think we need to go, they'll help us. They want to help. And, excuse me, people that want to help, they want to make sure that they're helping in a positive way. And if we have specific asks and we can give them direction, I'm sure that they'll step up and give us the help that we're looking for as much as they can. I agree, 100%.
As Doug has expressed, it's not for the lack of need, but the specificity of accomplishment is complex. And so I'm agreeing with what's been observed here. We want to be credible. And to be credible, then we're not ready to be credible, I don't think. I mean, there are a lot of things that I would say, let's do this, let's do that, let's do this. But I think what we need to do is have a stronger scientific integration into this process. It's going to take us longer than we wish it would take. The Everglades program has taken, 20 years? And I'm not proposing that we take 20 years to come up with a resolution, but how many?
No, forever.
Forever. Okay, it's taken
That's longer than 20
longer than 20 years. It's been forever. Okay, but I think we will benefit by being more precise in being able to come back and having some type of an interrelated, sequential kind of a move. And, yes, sir, Doug.
One thing I would like to add, the management committee showed up
Yes.
About a month or two ago and said that what they would like to do is to come up with an overall plan for the lagoon, to do a study and come up with an overall plan. I do think that would be helpful to us. I'm not sure we have the budget to accommodate it, but we may be able to come up with it. And what we would, if we had a plan, if we could go say, okay, this is the plan, and all 5 counties have signed off on it, and this is what we want to do, I think that we would go a long ways towards helping us both in D.C. and Tallahassee.
Oh, I think enormously. Yes, sir. please.
And again, come back, I agree with Commissioner Zadowski, but, when you talked about the science, it has to be science-driven. But if we're missing some science, I want to understand specifically what hole needs to be filled so that we can make that specific ask and not, a blanket. Because you're right, I think they're ready to help. We've got their attention. Put the specific ask in front of them.
And if we came up with an entire program we all signed off on, that's the kind of thing they really do like. Because just think how many registered voters we all represent.
Yeah.
Mad voters. And in the South, we represent mad voters with money.
Yes, yes. Okay, I see us having two different concepts that we're working with here at the moment, and I'm going to say, so you can say I'm wrong. That's why I'm going to say this. One might be a concept of a resolution that would evidence our concern, our seeking of the support from all levels of government to address the devastation of the lagoon from the various sources. So that is one. And the other is more specific. The other is going to take us longer to accomplish. And that is a presentation of here are the activities, here are the programs, the projects that we think will be the most useful. And that's going to take us a while to, of course, we have a list, but they're centered around what we need done. And so maybe we all get that our list integrated, but that needs to be under the guidance of our management group, of our science group. That's how. So I see we're doing two different things, and maybe others would say that's totally wrong. So.
And I'd like to ask Dwayne, when they were here asking about that kind of thing, is that what we were talking about? Is that what they had in mind?
Well, it's funny listening to your conversation. I'm going, that's exactly what the CCMP revision will do over the long haul, but we don't have the luxury of the time to do the full CCMP revision at the moment. So this is what I'm hearing, and this is what I'm going to suggest. You have a resolution of concern, which is a statement of, really not just the projects. We're talking more programmatic, and I look to the IFAS report as a good program, peer-reviewed kind of scientific view of the event-driven issues with Lake Okeechobee, and actually both coasts, Caloosahatchee and St. Lucie. And then we have these larger chronic issues, it's stormwater, it's groundwater, a whole suite, it's restoration. Three things that are going on right now that some of you are aware, but maybe not all. The DEO economic report is in its final draft. I have seen it. It has some return on investment projections that are impressive. Brevard County is working on a very detailed plan. They are in their draft final report. It is very specific to projects, programs, also has some very impressive return on investment values. So what I'm going to suggest is this for your consideration. If you would like, we can draft at the staff level a resolution of concern that is fact-based and science-based, to just set a position for the IRL, NEP, and the council. And what I'm going to call a preliminary action plan. On July 26th, the STEM AC meets for the first time. We can let them look at the draft, and then August 11th, the management board meets, and then you meet the following day on the 12th. And so we could bring that through process back to you if you think that timing works for you. If you think we need a resolution faster, the only challenge I have, and I'll look to our legal counsel, is we really need to bring that back for your discussion if staff is drafting. And in my view, that really ought to be all of you together looking at a staff-generated draft to determine whether or not it meets your needs. And so short timeline would be, the August board meeting. So I'm looking to your direction. I think we can do what you are talking about. I think it's a bit challenging, and later in the meeting, You'll hear some other work that's may be going on, but I do think it's time for us to, kind of put that big picture on the table. And clearly, the science is there. I mean, so most of this, we're not reinventing the wheel here, but what we are going to be short in, at least in some places, some of the counties have done tremendous work already and understand not only the programmatic needs of the county to, when we're talking about nutrient reduction, muck removal, those are the issues on the table. And that nutrient reduction is either groundwater, it's septic, it's failing sewer, or it's stormwater. Our feasibility study is moving to projects. And so we can bring that package together. And so you won't have this project in this location. But what we can do is say, here are the groups, the projects that we need funding for, and to make sure that we do something that I don't see right now in the marketplace. The discussion has separated, once again, the Indian River Lagoon from north to south. That has been a 25-year-old problem. I think it's a problem still today. Commissioner Daniels mentioned, what's happening in the south. I can tell you that the news about Lake Okeechobee and what's going on in Stewart is affecting tourism in Brevard right now. And I know because I'm getting phone calls from guys that I surf with, in places like Australia, who are going, Dwayne, can you go in the water? So the tourist doesn't differentiate that 156 miles. So we are all in this together. And so if that timeline works, we can draft a resolution, we can put together kind of a backup, what I would call preliminary action plan that's looking out, taking the information already available, and then bring it back to you in the August framework.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to take us back in 3 years' time. In 2013, the lost summer period, as so named, hundreds of individuals from along the lagoon made a trip to Washington, D.C. The WRDA bill had not been reviewed for 7 years. Because of that action, because of the devastation that was being shown around the nation, Congress was able to act. I submit to you that while individual projects will have its own merit and so on, my suggestion to you is this letter that we drafted based on Martin County's terms also is very general, but also can be identified, and I'll read them off. Require Interior Department of Army Corps of Engineers and other agencies to find additional land to store water north and south of Lake Okeechobee and ultimately restore the natural southern flow into the Everglades. That's just one item. Request an immediate review of current lake regulations. That was brought forward by Senator Negron, and we support that. Emergency funding for the dike repairs. I think everybody agrees on that. Emergency presidential disaster declaration accompanied by assistance from FEMA, USDA, and in addition to recent announcement of the emergency SBA loans. Businesses are going out of business today, and to wait until we have all our ducks in a row and every project defined and laid out, it's not an option. We can ask for the general terms that could be put into a WRDA bill, which would provide congressional funding so that after the fact, that if WRDA is fully funded through EPA or other opportunities, we could then, from the NEP standpoint, through projects and through whatever more science we need to understand what we're doing and what we need to do, can be achieved. Estuary restoration funding. There's not been conversation about the fish kills and the broodstock that has been lost, especially in the northern lagoon. Those redfish, it's going to take years for them to come back. So we're going to have to create new fisheries and aquaculture in the region to restock the entire lagoon. Everglades restoration funding and fast-tracking high-impact Everglades projects in both construction and planning phases. We know that all these projects that we're talking about and the specifics will need planning funding. So not asking for it during an emergency crisis is negligent on my part as an individual who sits on this board or sits on the county commission board and not doing so. Acceleration of the existing funded projects identified in the integrated delivery schedule. It exists. Let's accelerate those projects. Expansion of proven water farm projects. Doug, you talk about it all the time, moving that water north into the St. John's. I think it's in there. Creation of a septic to sewer infrastructure assistance program to partner with state and local governments and homeowners. That covers the whole lagoon. If you have more, great. But if we have an opportunity to create and get Congress to support a WRDA bill to put the money in place, then we can go ask for it with specifics. That's what I'm asking today, and I hope we can do that. I don't expect you to write a resolution right here on the spot. I don't. But having a general letter that supports just that to the president, I think is something we can agree on and then come back with an additional language for a resolution or proclamation, whatever it is you want to do. We're all getting beat up at home. We are. Kevin has plastic wrap he puts around him, bubble wrap, but it's true. And we do have the power, as stated, Commissioner Daniels, we represent a lot of people who are a lot of votes. It's an election year. We need to work now.
I have other comments. We have two sort of semi-alternate perspectives at the moment, not in conflict, but just the Director DeFries has presented sort of a twofold concept for us here. I'm sure
Mr. Chairman,
I'm sorry.
I just asked a question from legal counsel. And I suspected that you want to move quickly. If you want to do that, and I'll let our counsel, go into more detail. If you agree to specific points, and then instruct the chair to sign a letter to those specific points, then you are in the proper procedure under Sunshine to move that letter forward. And so if you give that very specific direction, you could do that here. If in fact you send staff out, then we believe that we really need to bring that back to you as a collective unit in order to move it forward to be in proper procedure. Is that a good statement?
Yes, I think generally you've got it right, but just to clarify, I'm personally not comfortable with drafting a resolution that would get signed in between now and your next meeting if the board hasn't agreed on the terms of that resolution. Certainly the board can authorize a letter to be drafted with input from the executive director, et cetera, to the chair on whether it's specific points as outlined or others. But for the board to adopt a resolution, which is an official action of the entity, if you don't have that before you today, there are communities that will have input and back and forth on resolutions between staff and various members of the board, and then ultimately that product gets presented to one person to sign. And then there's also some case law that suggests that becomes a sunshine law issue that I don't think you really want to get into. So again, if it's a letter, I think that's easy to work through and you all can give the direction. If you want to adopt a formal resolution and you want to do it today, you've got to be pretty specific about those terms. I wouldn't advise you to let it be worked out amongst individual members of the board and staff behind closed doors over the coming weeks.
Yes, sir.
So in our technical reports at the beginning of the meeting, all I heard was it's going to be a long, hot summer and there's more to come. And we all know that back in March we had the fish kill on the north end. I want us, whatever product comes out, I want it to have punch. I want it to be laser focused, and I'm willing to invest the resources in getting that. Gosh, I wish that it would be gone within a month and that we have to capture this moment, but we're going to be in this for a while, and I just want us to get it right. And Commissioner, yeah, in terms of my personal isolation, this is my backyard. I mean, I have blue-green algae in my backyard. My kids' Boston whaler is in my driveway, and it's usually in the water this time of the year. So I live it. I want us to get it right.
You wish? Yes, sir.
Yeah. Nobody likes to move more quicker than a farmer, and I've represented ag my whole life. And our guys want to, when you tell them to get her done, they want to get her done. But this council is, in my opinion, is designed and put together to lead the lagoon out of its problems and into the future. And this is an opportunity, as bad as it is, I think it's an opportunity with a silver lining. And I agree with Kevin, if we just slow down a little bit here and craft a smart letter, because once that letter's up there, the president's desk and on Bill Nelson's desk and Rubio's desk, it's going to be the letter. Because this is the council, this is the group, in my opinion, this is the future of the lagoon. And so I want to be sure we got this right. And the St. Lucie County letter, I think, it's everything I want. There's nothing there I don't want. But there's some things I think that should be added to that, or could be added to that, one or two other items. I just want to be sure we got it right for north to south. And I don't see a problem with waiting to make sure the letter's got everything we need in it before it's sent up to Washington.
On that note, do we hear a motion that a letter be prepared that would incorporate the various items as suggested by the St. Lucie letter, but that would also incorporate individual inputs from council members to executive director?
Mr. Chairman,
please.
One thing we may want to do, I don't know how time sensitive this is, but we may want to call a special meeting just to go ahead and get it approved and get it out. We need to strike while the iron is hot. The iron may cool at any time. You never know what's going to happen.
I think that's absolutely appropriate. If we can compress it and make it right, we all benefit. The lagoon benefits.
So that would be a two-pronged, help, you guys are the motion maker guys.
You know,
Well, I'm listening to all of this, and not being a politician, but being a longtime businessman, I can't tell you how often I'm frustrated with government. It always moves way too slow for me. But at the same time, I've come to understand that there's a reason it moves slow, because there's a lot of contemplation that's necessary on the parts of an awful lot of people that represent an awful lot more people. So I think that it would behoove us to put this in the hands of Dr. DeFries and his folks, and with input from us, and come back with whatever we think that we need. We certainly have an awful lot of talent in different counties.
And right here in staff, we got a gifted staff.
And we can have this letter that we all would review and add to or subtract from. And if it takes a week or 2 weeks, this is a problem that we're going to be dealing with for a lot of years. So I would love to get something done tomorrow. I would like to have a magic wand and fix this problem tomorrow, but realistically, that's not going to happen. So I would suggest that if we deem that we need to have a special meeting, if we feel like we can save a week or two, I'm all for that. But I think we really do need to put this in the hands of our staff and let them reach out to the counties and get all the information that they need, and then we can follow up with an approval and send it on. So I would like to make that motion.
Help me know what that motion is.
The motion would be for our staff to gather information and to present to our Congress folks, our senators, our state senators, our state representatives, our governor, of course, and the president, of course, and outline where we are and where we need to be and how much help we need from them.
Yes, sir, please.
And I agree with that 100%, and I would also add to that, to amend to that, that we have a meeting before our next regularly scheduled meeting so we can expedite that. But I agree 100%. We need to be thoughtful about what we put into this resolution. We have an opportunity, and I think there needs to be some engagement, and that brought back to the board for review, because as we've talked about, the more specific we can be in that in those asks, the more actionable it is. And that's really the key to, whatever we do. If we want to show leadership, we need to have that, those key items so they can be acted upon, and those are the ones that are meaningful to us. So I don't know if I can amend that motion at this point, or if it needs to be
Sure, I would-
seconded, and then we can amend it, or
I would accept
how.
that.
Are you
my
seconding?
motion.
Your comments are accepted, so you seconded
I second,
the
yes.
amended motion.
Can I understand, is it a letter that we're sending to the administration just to outline, or are you asking for a resolution to be brought back in a couple weeks?
At
Or-
this point, the motion was a letter that would then be made, pulled together and made available to a special meeting for that consideration. I'm sorry.
And I
Yes.
think the specifics are important because as a legislator myself, I get an awful lot of people that come in my office and say, we need help with. Well, what would you like me to do? I need some input. I can't just say, okay, I'm going to help you. I need to know what help you need. And so if we're giving these folks, our senators locally and statewide and nationally, and our president, we give them specifics, then they have some actionable areas that they can target. And they have the staffs and the know-how and the people that can do these kinds of things.
Is there further discussion,
Mr.
please?
Chairman, before you actually call the vote, I've got a thought. We need to publicly announce this meeting. We already have a scheduled STEM AC meeting for July 26th, where we have a room. If it's your pleasure, we could announce an emergency meeting of the council for that July 26th
That would
and
be a
just
question
have
for
you
Carol.
meet, with the STEM AC committee, but we will have to publicly announce that. And then, just as a detail point, what I think I hear you say is that we're preparing a letter, but with that letter, you're going to want some backup detail in order to substantiate, the broad request, and then you want it basically at the regional, state, federal levels. And so we're going to need to address those issues. And so for each of you who represent counties, my next step, if you move in this direction, is I'm going to be looking to your counties to get some guidance as to what your local issues are. I think it's pretty clear what we need to do with the Lake Okeechobee between, all of the reports, SEP, SERP. There's a lot of projects on a list and a lot of projects underway and a lot of really good recommendations on how to move forward. With this larger chronic issue, if we're going to do this, we need to get it right, at least in the broad categories of requests. So I think we can put this together between now and the 26th.
26 is a Tuesday. I know several have board meetings on Tuesdays. I don't have my calendar. But if we,
How about if we poll you individually on dates? And, if that doesn't work, we'll pick a date that does work so we have a quorum.
Mr. Chair, if I can just jump in. Chapter 189 contains the notice requirements that you have to operate under. We're required to basically advertise in newspapers, which we do at the beginning of the year, in all the counties, the list of our regular meetings. If we want to meet and we don't want to have to go through that expensive advertising requirement, we have a couple of options. One is we can declare it an emergency, meet and sort it out once we get back together. The second is we can recess the meeting today and reconvene if you've picked a specific date and time that you can announce today. So similar to what you often do in your local governments with public hearings, you'll recess it and reconvene in another day to obviate the advertising requirements. So I would recommend to you that's the easiest way, but I recognize that means you have to pick a date and time right now. And then we don't have any issue whatsoever under Chapter 189. Alternatively, if you don't think you can pick a date and time now and it's declared an emergency, then we can coordinate with you and call the special meeting, and we can do our best to then get notice out through your various government agencies, post in your county buildings, et cetera, the notice, and hope that it's sufficient.
Mr. Chairman?
Chairman, just
Okay.
one point, the 26th, just as informational, DEP would not be able to attend that. I know Deputy Secretary Bartlett and myself have another meeting that we both have to attend on that date.
We're getting buddy. Yes, sir. Chris.
I was just going to ask what time the STEM meeting was already configured, because we do have our 9 a.m. meeting on that Tuesday, regular board meeting of the county.
Kathy, if I remember, it was 10 o'clock, 10 a.m.
Okay, but I think council has suggested a couple of ways that we might overcome that, and
Mr. Chairman, what about the 27th or the 28th? The 26th, I could not make it, but the 27th or the 28th would be
Yeah, I would be
fine.
good on the 27th.
I don't have my calendar, so I'm unable to tell you at the moment, but the two alternatives are that we recess. Of course, we got to go through our agenda as soon as we get at it. But then subsequent to that we recess to a date certain. That's one alternative. The other is to declare an emergency that we then can be polled, I guess, would be okay, of an appropriate date. That would be a little more flexible for us. Otherwise, we got to say today before we leave what date and time it will be. But the emergency meeting would be as effective and would be a little more flexible. But we have to have a certain time limit availability to give notice for an emergency meeting as well, or no? Okay, but we do have to have some time for y'all to be effective, to you be able to come back to something so you have to have some input on that as well. I favor the emergency approach. That gives us more flexibility to determine a specific date. But the question then is for staff, this is an unexpected volume of.
We can pull some multiple dates. Obviously, we're not going to have you go tomorrow. We'll need a little bit of time, but if you decide on that route, what we can do is pull dates, and we'll look for the earliest available date where we've got a quorum. Hopefully, everybody's able to make that, and then we will adjust staff schedule to meet that earliest date.
Okay, but the question, and maybe you considered it, but the question is getting the work done so that the meeting will be able to accomplish the execution of a letter.
We'll get the work done.
Okay. That's all right. Right, so that seems to be an approach, is that we could declare an emergency meeting and we could accomplish these things. Is that acceptable? We had a motion. I sort of lost track of what we were doing here. I'm going to need to rely on council to sort of say where are we on this thing, because we had a motion and a second.
Yes, I believe you had a motion for staff to outline where we are, where we need to be in the letter, and then we got distracted on how it would be called. So I would just recommend, if you want to go back to a motion that would direct staff to prepare a letter and supporting documentation so that the board can, in an emergency meeting in the next 2-3 weeks, you name where you want it to be, come together for purposes of taking action on that letter to address the emergency issues that are before you.
I so move.
Works for me.
It's been moved and seconded. Yes, sir. You have discussion. Any further discussion? Chris, do you have any input on it? Any further discussion? Any wish to oppose that motion? I see that adopted unanimously. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, for date opportunity, I heard two other commissioners, I'm sorry, sir, it said for date opportunity, I heard two other commissioners say the 27th and 28th were fine. They're also fine for me. That's helpful in, getting started on a date.
Okay. Thank you, sir. We are at item 7. Dennis, you probably thought we'd never make it, but it's your turn.
Mr. Chairman, while Dennis is coming up, Dennis is going to give a presentation on the findings from a conference that we had looking at data sharing, which is very apropos. Also talk a little bit about the monitoring that they do. In our previous meeting, we looked at Dr. Edie Witter and the ORCA, and monitoring is coming up as a high priority across the board, both at local and regional, and we've got a lot out there. And so this will give you kind of a continuing look at the monitoring position that we have as we move forward. So with that, Dennis, it's all yours.
Well, I really want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here today, staff and council. And as Dwayne said, I'm primarily here to talk about a report of a workshop that we did. There were participants even from the council and from 2 of the staff members.
I think speak.
Okay, it's just not working.
So they can pick you up better. Good.
Is that better?
Good.
Is that better? Okay, sorry. Very briefly, I'm going to set the stage for this. And we had several parts of the initiative, including an online survey, a workshop. Most importantly, I want to share our recommendations for moving forward and how we might do that. I hope most of you have heard about the Indian Lagoon Observatory. It's something that we've been working on at Harbor Branch for about 5 or 6 years. The idea goes back longer than that, something I've been trying to do. But our goal really ultimately is to acquire and disseminate as much information as we can to really understand how the lagoon works and how it can be better managed. There's a lot of key parts to this. One is some of the long-term research that's been mentioned here today. Another one is collaboration among organizations, and you probably know about the Indian Lagoon Symposium. This initiative on the workshop, I think, falls under that particular bullet. And also, as Dwayne mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit briefly about a network of advanced observing stations. So in putting more technology into the observatory is a key part of what we want to do. The background for the data workshop that I'm speaking about today really started in 2013. We had another workshop. Both of these were funded by our foundation at Harbor Branch. And this one was led by Dr. Margaret Leinen, who was our executive director. And it became something that we called our global estuary. And the idea was, before we were going to focus really on the IRL, the lagoon, her suggestion was that we kind of elevate our thinking, that we try to bring in experts from around the country to try to put a broader perspective on what we needed to do and understand what was going on elsewhere in the nation. And ultimately, it became, beyond that, it became more global, extended beyond just the nation. But the idea is, what can we learn from others? I think the analogy here might be, we all think globally. We need to do that more and more, but to do that better, how can we act locally to connect that to a global effort? And some of the key outcomes of that meeting was the recognition that we need to improve and share knowledge better than we have in the past if we're really going to manage better. We need to transfer lessons learned in one system to other systems, maybe where there's less information. And also a key point was this technology to develop a network of observation and prediction systems. It's a very short report. It's in the packet of information that you have if you want to take a look at that. It's also readily available on our Harbor Branch website. And actually, the lagoon was one of the case histories that was included in that study. And that's the link for anybody who wants to know a little bit more about our global estuary. So that was the context for our regional workshop, which we held in December. And just key points about that is what we really wanted to do was to talk and share with interested parties throughout the lagoon how scientific data is being collected, how it's being shared, translated, with the idea that we need to do a better job. We need to improve various uses and translations of the data for not only scientific research, but for management and conservation efforts. I think some of the things we've heard about today, with the blooms, unfortunate as they are, to me, they just tell us even more so, why it's critical that we do a better job with our data. I think some really key points for you to recognize as you look through the report. We have a very diverse steering committee. It wasn't just scientists. As a matter of fact, there were just a couple of scientists on it. It reached out into other folks, and I'll identify them shortly. Also critical to this was a workshop, online survey that was done in advance of the workshop. So we could come in with a lot of information on, who are the players, who's collecting data, who's willing to share, what kinds of data do the users really want to have, what are the gaps in data collection. And this is a picture of most of the steering committee taken during the actual meeting. Amy Adams is not here today, but I think you all know Amy. She's worked with the NEP for many years from its very beginning. And she was a key part of this and did a lot of the logistics, did a lot of the legwork that we really could not do. Megan Davis, also I want to recognize from Harbor Branch. She has that really nice title of Special Advisor for what she did. She was a key part of that, and she had a major part in the global estuary work. Dwayne was just freshly proposed as the head of the NEP, and we were able to get him on it. Grace Johns, you may recognize her as being the person who did led the economic evaluation that we all quote, that $3.6 billion that we know needs to be updated. She led that effort. We had a key person, Kathleen O'Keefe from FWC. Mitch Roffer, many of you know him as for his forecasting services that he does. So he's somebody who's done a great job translating data, largely used by fishermen, for example. We had Vembu from Socorro. Socorro is the Southeast Ocean Observatory. The whole country has been divided up into different regions to basically bring more assets to the table, to do real-time monitoring, and again, to kind of collect the data and make it readily available. And we really benefited a lot by his participation, including adapting some of his online surveys that we basically modified for the Lagoon. Gary Zarrillo, many of you know him as a longtime scientist at FIT. The survey, just very briefly, and you also have in your document actually another report that will be posted online next week on our Harbor Branch website that is a more detailed report about the data survey. But our first part of it asked about who the person was, what's your role in your organization, what does your organization do? Do you have a data steward? A data steward, is there a go-to person at your institution that can get the data for us as opposed to trying to track that down? A lot of times you'll read in the newspapers, FIT is doing this, Harbor Branch is doing that. Sometimes we don't know, where's the data, who's actually doing the work. A lot of types of, next questions were all about types of data that we collect. What kind of data? Is it water quality data? Is it biological data? Is it meteorological data? How often do you do it? Is there metadata available? Metadata is the details about how the data is collected and where it's stored. Very critical. What are your thoughts about sharing data? Are there limitations? Sometimes there are, sometimes there not. Are you willing to share? This is all kinds of data, by the way. We think nowadays that everything's computerized. Aha. We know there's a lot of key data, though, that's still sitting around in boxes, sitting around people's garages. It's kind of amazing some of the things that came out to us during the study. The last part of the survey was really directed to utilization. So what types of data do you want? What types of data do you use? How often do you get those data? Is it something, do you want real-time data? Do you want year-to-year data? Do you want archival data? And a real interesting question was the last one, which basically was open-ended and said, what are the gaps? What is it that you want to know? And if you want to page to the bottom of the last couple of pages of this, I summarized them for you in certain areas. And I think that's an evolving list. I'm sitting today listening, and I'm thinking if we had this meeting in the last 2 months, we probably would have said, we'd like to see more toxicity information. We'd like to see more microcystin information. That's, for example, is obviously yet another gap. So it's an evolving list, but it really was the first time that we got to do that. Some of the quick overviews are the things that we collect the most are water quality, physical oceanography, and weather information. There's a lot of things that are collected much less often. Most data is collected monthly or weekly. Things that are most readily available that you can get easiest is things like GIS, locations, that's real easy nowadays. Water quality, seagrass data, as you know, is pretty readily available. Certain types of biological and the weather data. The ones that are most frequently provided is archival, long-term data. Increasingly, we're understanding the value of need to do long-term research, and that we can learn a lot by what's been done and measured in the past. We don't need to collect new data all the time. What's provided most oftenly is water quality, and you hear about that all the time. What's less shared is biological data and physical oceanography data. That's harder to get for people who want it. Most of the organizations do not have a designated data steward, so it is difficult to know exactly, you know that a work was done 10 years ago at a certain place, maybe that person's still there, maybe he's not. How do you get that information? The professions that most use the data, all kinds of people. So the obvious ones, like the scientists, the monitors, the managers, environmental consultants, but also recreational boaters, recreational fishermen, informal educators, tremendous utilization of information there. So getting more to the workshop itself, it was held in December over a day and a half, and you'll see the way the report is structured. We had 3 panels, and the first one addressed data collection. The second one basically said, what do the users want? And the third one was a better way to share data. What are the issues? How can we share that data better than we have? What are the obstacles? What are the barriers? So we had each panel was moderate. I was one of the moderators, kind of at the last minute. Dwayne was one of the moderators. The moderator had a lot to do with shaping the questions. The questions are all in the report that you can look at. The panel was typically 5 or 6 folks, very diverse background. You can take a look at the back page for the participants and see how diverse that was. And we led off each group, each session with a keynote speaker who tried to set the stage for that particular topic. And then there would be a period of an hour and a half or so for the panel to address particular questions, raise new ones, and get input from about the 80 or so people that were there. So the report then includes the outcomes and the recommendation. One of the things we put together as a graphic format in the report, which I show here on the screen, is just kind of some of the diversity of groups that are collecting data. These are the ones that responded to the survey. So we had about 95 people who responded to the survey, and these are some of the major data providers. We did divide it into 2 maps, kind of along the water management district lines, but not exactly, but it's kind of the north and the central, and then the southern areas. And you don't need to see who all the providers are, but there's different types of data, and you can see that there's actually a great diversity of institutions. There's a great diversity of types of data. There is some overlap, but there's a lot of complementary work that's going on. And this is for the southern region as well. We ended up coming up with 8 consensus points. So if you wish, these are the conclusions. These are the things that we would like to see, advanced. And in the end, that one that bubbled to the surface, and ironically, you talked about it a lot this morning, is really how the scientific community needs to work together, and with folks like yourself, to do a better job to work on getting that funding that's really needed for long-term data collection programs to meet the demands of science and to meet demands of management. And you all already spoke about that today. One of your members was there. One of the things we did in the report that I kind of like is we had a recording. We did grab things that people said during the panel or during the participation to kind of make the points maybe better than somebody like me can. But here Doug Daniel says it about kind of I think you said this earlier today. But we need to really reach all along the Palm Beach County all the way to Volusia. Money is what our restoration needs. If there was one take-home message, I really think that on the science side, we feel this very strongly. The IRL needs a substantial, stable, recurring source of funding to support the long-term monitoring needed to properly manage the lagoon. Was asked to talk a little bit about our LOBOs. I thought I would seg into that now and then return to the other consensus points, because this is one thing that we've been doing in the last couple of years, but particularly address the one situation we have now in the St. Louis estuary, and those are systems that are just coming around to being in the lagoon now for a year. So it's kind of an interesting point in time. LOBOS is a technology, stands for Land Ocean Biogeochemical Observatory. It was developed actually in California by Mobari, Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. Started with NSF support with the idea of to develop new sensors that could handle the long-term needs of monitoring in situations such as we have here. And our goal really is to do it real time. A big focus of what we do is our QA/QC, and that we make it available right away to everybody. Here's the measurements. I'm sure you're all familiar with these types of parameters. If you've never seen the insides of these, I know some of you heard other presentations of mine. This is what they look like. They're very sophisticated. They all integrate into something called the Storex, which I guess I have a mouse that can work here. That's kind of like the brain, and all the different sensors are connected. The cycle P up here is actually a wet chemistry technique, something I've done for years, many of us have, but it's been miniaturized, and it has the ability to turn things around very quickly. That is the limiting step. It takes about 20 minutes, and that's why we post about 20 minutes after every hour. So everything else is more optical sensors, and we could post that right away, but it's really determined by the phosphorus. We do a lot of things to prevent fouling. Fouling is our biggest challenge. Everything is, we wrap it in tape, put a lot of anti-fouling paint on top of the tape, and we have a lot of copper wires over top of the cable. This is connected to a weather station in many cases. All our sites in the St. Louis estuary have weather stations. It's paneled by a solar cell here, and you can see there's a little antenna. Sends basically a cell phone call back to the server, and that's what we get, that's what we post. That's our website. You can go to it. It's available all the time. That's what the landing page looks like. And what I really say is when you do this, go to LoboViz. You can glance over any of these, get the real-time data, but you can also just go to LoboViz and you can get all of our data right away, very quickly. And you can manipulate it in a lot of different ways. We started with one site at Harbor Branch here in St. Lucie County with funding from a grant from Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute Foundation. We will extend that down to Fort Pierce, just north of the North Bridge, where that freshwater input is that was mentioned earlier. A site near Vero Beach, which is downstream of all of the canals that flow, that drain the main part of Indian River County. And our last one is near Sebastian, south of the San Sebastian River, so another freshwater source, another inlet. Inlets and these freshwater inputs, it's what it's all about. I think you all know that. Then we were fortunate to get money from Senator Negron's efforts 2 years ago. Those funds are administered through the DEP, and sorry, that's when those went online. And that allowed us to deploy a site in the South Fork, North Fork, so it's kind of at the basis of those. So it's capturing all the activities in those parts of the watershed. The estuary comes together. This is Stewart. We call this the mid-estuary area. So this is right where there's a lot of restoration work by FOS and so on. The water flows down here. We have one in the crossroads where it intersects the lagoon before the water flows out. In most cases, it flows out. 91% of the water flows out that inlet. Most of the time, it goes south. As you pointed out, though, it can flow north. And if you haven't seen it, there's some really cool satellite images that show that water recently has moved all the way up far up to Jacksonville, right from this little old inlet, which is, if you don't have that, I'll send it to you. We also have one in Jensen Beach. We had a technical advisory committee put together, about 35 people that help us locate these. And their recommendation was put one there. We want to know what's happening even though it's a smaller volume of water, what happens with that water as it moves north. And that's particularly germane to the current situation. Then very, very recently, although it was the funds that we sought first, we have another one that's right near the incoming flow in the C-44. We call it our second South Fork site. It went online very recently. That's actually through the South Florida Water Management District. And so you can see we're coming around to our anniversary date for the installations. We're really right now at the one-year time frame for most of them. And then the most recent one was just in April. But again, it was kind of good timing for the current situation. I wanted to show you real quickly all the data up to 2 days ago. This is what it looks like for salinity. So this is hourly readings for that period of time. And everything's color-coded. Anybody can pull this off real time. You could do it right now with your phones if you want. So this is the one nearest the inlet, the crossroads. So you can see even though it's by the inlet, we have these drops in salinity. The rest of these are all in the estuary itself. And you can see, for example, many of you may recall, late in September, we had a rather significant rainfall, up to 12 inches. We measured that right at our sites with our Lobos. Now, Lake Okeechobee was not flowing, okay? But you can see, even in that situation, how quickly that estuary becomes freshwater. You can also see that how quickly, once the rain stops, it returns to where it should be on the salinity. Okay, so that's an interesting situation, I think. If I said to you, put an arrow on when you think Lake Okeechobee is starting to discharge, I think you all could do it. It's right there, end of January, beginning of February. You can see how quickly the salinity becomes basically a freshwater system. You can also see increases in discharges by Lake Okeechobee. So you all know what happened here. It was very high discharges. They reduced the flows for a while. You can see the estuary starts to return to where it should be. Never quite get there. And then as flows are increased, we again have quite a big drop. A lot of talk about that blue-green alga, and I don't think I need to show these pictures. I think Deb did a fantastic job. I completely agree with her comments, too, about how it's going to get worse before it gets better. This is that recent satellite image that she mentioned. You can see this is actually a bloom that's quite extensive over Lake Okeechobee. So a lot of what's going on in the St. Lucie estuary, really, I think you all do recognize, it was mentioned several times. You know, it's really about what comes down the Kissimmee River, what goes into Okeechobee, and so on. And these are some other images. I'm sure you've seen them or others. So I just then pulled just the last month, because as Deb mentioned, really key things is this is a bloom that basically is coming from outside the system. It's basically coming into freshwater to a reduced salinity situation. It will continue to live as long as that salinity is low. And as she pointed out, when it gets into higher salinity water, it dies, and it stinks. That odor is hydrogen sulfide, among other things. But yeah, it's nauseous. The main thing, though, to take home from what she said is that when it dies, the toxin is released. So the toxin does not disappear right away. And that's why you are able to get these higher levels downstream. And the bottom line is until everything is flushed out, or until new material is not constantly being introduced, this is going to go on for a long time. The key thing is, a lot of times people use 5 parts per thousand. The truth is we don't really know this particular strain, this particular microcystis. Blue-green algae are notoriously different in their physiological responses to the environment. Nobody's actually done those measurements. We have somebody at Harbor Branch who's proposing to do that, and that might tell us a little bit more about exactly where that line should be. But basically you can see that for the last month, conditions for most of the St. Lucie estuary have been favorable for that organism to continue to live. Once it gets further out the estuary, of course, it's going to die, but like I said, the microsystems will be released. Again, she mentioned it, temperature is critical. We have cyanobacteria blooms in the summertime. Cyanobacteria like high temperatures. Definition of high temperature overall is like 25 degrees centigrade. Well, that's not very high for us, okay? All summer long, we have temperatures, and you can see they increase. So as those temperatures continue to increase, as she said, it's likely not to get any better for a while. I looked at a few other parameters. Again, I don't want to overwhelm everybody with everything we're seeing and doing, but turbidity is another thing that we're seeing. So you can see this is the St. Lucie, the top two are the South Fork stations. You can see that's where the Okeechobee discharges are coming through. You can see how much more turbidity is in the water. Turbidity is all those particles. A lot of that is particulate matter that, you know, led to all that muck. Anybody who's ever gone into the South Fork, you know, if you have never done it, take that PVC pole, ram it down as far as you can, see all that muck, and if you keep going, you eventually will hit white sand. It's kind of an interesting thing if you've never done it. But decades of that has led to some of these problems. So elevated turbidity clearly coming from Lake Okeechobee. Now, here's a curious one, phosphate. And I really like nutrients. Nutrients, of course, are critical to understanding algal blooms. You can see, again, this is just the past month, not even past month, just a few weeks. I wanted to show you that, you know, we have a very clear pattern here, daily pattern. We can see at times it's kind of just gets, when there's so much water going, we don't even see the tidal pattern anymore. So we took a very simple look at that, just looking at what's in the South Fork. And what you actually see, this is the tide. So this is the tidal signal coming up and down. If you take a close look, what you see there is the phosphate is actually hooked to high tide. So this might be not what you would be thinking. You might be thinking, oh, shouldn't there be a lot more phosphorus coming down from Lake Okeechobee? Well, in fact, it appears that you know, we have higher phosphate. This is in the North Fork now. We have higher phosphate at low tide. And what we actually think is happening is we're actually seeing, as the water moves back into the South Fork from the other parts of the estuary, including the North Fork, what we're actually thinking is we're actually seeing signs of nutrient pollution, if you will, from the rest of the watershed. So I don't want to belittle in any way how unfortunate the impacts of Lake Okeechobee are, but I do want to say that there's a lot more to the story. And so hopefully, you know, this is a year where we have a lot of discharges. Maybe next year is a year where we have a drier season, and maybe we'll be able to tease this out a little bit more. But there is still a lot of other impacts going on to the estuaries. It's not all Lake Okeechobee. And as you go further away and you go further up throughout the system, as some other folks have pointed out today, there are other issues that come into play. There are other issues as to what are the sources of nutrients. So, in fact, it is a complicated thing. But I think that this type of real-time water quality monitoring, and we're not the only ones to do it, of course. Work is doing it. The St. Johns River Water Management District is doing it in Brevard County. I think it's bringing an incredible amount of data available that can be used real time. It can be very helpful to make decisions. And I think not only about, you know, what's bad. I think, for example, if you say, oh, we're going to spend $100 million to fix this part of the lagoon, and that's going to improve water quality. I think you want to know, does it improve water quality? And I think the only way you can do that is by having the data that says yes or no. It proposed to do this, yes it did it, or no it didn't. And either way, that information should be made available so that we can learn from it and it can be applied elsewhere. So stay tuned on that. So that took care of the request to cover a little bit of that. But it segs right into the next consensus point. That's why I kind of nestled it there, is that an important product of our data, and I think this group would be totally on board with this, I don't think I need to say this, is that one of the most important things we can do with the data is really identify those pollution sources so that we can stop the flow of pollution into the lagoon, so that you all can prioritize, what can we do with a certain amount of money, and realize again that what happens in Brevard is different than what happens in Martin and in between. And scientifically, we understand that. Clay Henderson, who many of you know is now at Stetson, he gave, I thought, a really great keynote speech, just spoke, didn't do any PowerPoints, and one of his key things was, there's so many things we could do, but we got to start somewhere. I mean, you can read the whole quote there. We need to start to agree, we need to move forward, and we need to get that message clearly across to our policymakers. So again, I think that's kind of very consistent with what I heard this morning. Other key things that we think we need to do, identify and maintain an inventory of historic and ongoing IRL data sets. So we've started the process. Our goal was to start to get that information, and we're going to make more and more of that available as we can, in terms of, here are the people to contact for data. Another point that goes very closely with that is to archive those data sets, including the ones that are in the filing cabinets that need to be digitized. Before the people that can tell us what the data are and where they are, they're not always going to be here. And make them accessible to users. There's a lot to be learned from things. So for example, there was some great mapping done of seagrasses by somebody who worked at Harbor Branch in the 1970s. He now works at Continental Shelves Associate. So this is a PDF of a scanned copy of a technical report that you can no longer really get very easily, although we did recently digitize all these things. There's a lot of that out there, a lot of what we call gray literature. There's a lot of stuff in the agencies. The counties are loaded with information as well. Here's another map that was done, I believe, of caulerpis, so one of these seaweeds that occasionally gets a little out of control in Brevard County, for example. We need to organize and maintain a centralized listing of available IRL data sets and how to access them, make it easy for people to do that. Mitch Roffer, here's another quote from him, and we need to recognize that we all need to work together to share the information to get to the solutions to the issues that we're facing. So, a lot of times people don't share very well. Scientists are that way sometimes. I think we all understand that's not what we need to do. We need to make everything available as fast as we can. We also have to make sure the data we make available are correct, they're accurate, they're precise. And all that information, all that supporting information has to be available with the data so the end user can make that decision as well. I oftentimes use the analogy, boy, sometimes there's so much data, it's like, opening a fire hydrant and you just want to get a little drink of water, okay? And I feel like we're in that situation a lot. And I think that a lot of the end users, I think they feel that. They just want to know this. They don't want to know all of that. They want to know this. So I think we have to do a better job to develop observation and prediction systems as tools that can be used as a variety of user groups. And wouldn't it be helpful if somehow we could have a way where, if we're doing this real-time monitoring and some of the other frequent monitoring that's going on, wouldn't it be nice if somehow there could be an automated way of saying, you know what, something, and I think somebody mentioned this earlier with the drones, something's going on here. We need to throw our limited resources, we need to work together, we need to go see what's going on here. Oxygen levels are starting to fall. Why? That's just one example. It would be nice if we could just automatically send out a flag to anybody who's interested, not just agencies, not just scientists, but the average person. Here, something's going on. So that was a recommendation. Process and translate the science data to inform and engage the community. One of the things that really came up is scientists need to tell better stories. We need to say, here's the situation. Eve Samples, many of you know her from her work on TC Palm and the local newspapers. She was on one of the panels. She basically said, you need to have those visuals. They need to be something that people can see. You need to have good, concise narrative that says, here's what's going on. We need to tell our stories to a lot of different types of people. We need to tell them in different ways. We need to be more proactive. We need to get it out quicker. We need to use social media and all the other traditional ways of communicating. That's the consensus points all put together as they are in the report that you have. And I think that, to me, as I was driving here, I was thinking, well, you know, what was the most important thing we actually did? I actually think the most important thing we actually did was just to get everybody together and to say that, you know what, we can do a better job. And a lot of people, are now, I think, committed to doing this. And I think I see a lot of parallels with the development of this group. It started out with the county collaboratives in a way. You all started communicating. And I think that was an important step. And now we have a different way that the NEP is running. And I think we also now are going to have a new STEM committee that is meeting, as you know, later this month. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to take what we did at the workshop to the next step. More immediately, we're going to be posting a listing of the data sources. It turns out a lot of people said, yeah, I have a data, and we have a link, but they didn't actually provide them in the survey. So there's a lot of follow-up work that we're going to be doing. We will be updating that, and I will send that information to the council so they can distribute it, or to the staff so they can distribute it to you all. I think we do need to use the new STEM advisory committee to advance and implement the consensus recommendations and others, not just limited to this, but I think this is a good starting point, and develop a long-term plan for IL monitoring and research. I think we need to work with other estuarine researchers throughout the country to develop national standards for data acquisitions, quality assurance, quality control, management. USGS, for example, is putting enormous resources into this. I went to a meeting in early May, and one of the things I learned is here in the Lagoon, we're facing the same issues that everybody else is in terms of trying to handle that fire hydrant of data. And I think that we're not all going to solve it on our own, but I think working collectively over the next several years, 3 years or so, I think we're going to see a much greater integration of data that's readily available and making it available in multiple ways to people who want to use it. Like I said earlier, inform and engage the community, tell more stories that are meaningful, and then work with other IRL stakeholders to develop that substantial, stable, recurring source of funding to support the long-term monitoring needed to properly manage the lagoon that I highlighted earlier. There's a whole bunch of people I need to thank, the rest of the steering committee, the panelists, the keynote speakers, everybody who participated either at the workshop or at the survey, and all this was funded by Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute Foundation and also the River Branch Foundation, and to some extent our specially licensed plate, the Save Our Seas plate. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Have questions? Yes, please.
Dr. Hennesek, I just wanted to thank you for the presentation and also for the meeting. I had staff that was at it in December and said it was fabulous, so they really appreciated the discussion and that opportunity. You mentioned in the consensus recommendations and also in sort of what you are trying to achieve with your LOBOs is this predictive, aspect of it, collecting the data, but then also predicting the biological response. Can you tell me a little bit about what you all are working on that effort and what you're aiming for?
I think our initial, we're still in that early phase of getting it set up properly. And as you know, being DEP, and for those who don't know, especially when you work with DEP funding, you do have a very rigorous procedure for getting approval for a quality assurance, quality control program. That's first and foremost, is getting the data right. You say get the water right. Well, on the science side, we say, get the data right. So we're working on that. Some of the things that we're doing are trying to automate a lot of the QA/QCs. So if we see outliers and so on, can we tag them? What do we need to do with the data? Ultimately, though, where it's going is it needs to go to become more of a prediction. We have a couple of modelers, more oceanographic than I am, more physical oceanographic type folks that have been hired at Harbor Branch in the last couple of years, who I think will be doing some of that modeling. I know some of the folks at FIT also have very strong modeling capabilities, as do the water management districts. So I think part of this is that the data are available for all of these efforts. I do think it would be really good to come together, and again, I see the STEM committee as being an opportunity to say, okay, what modeling efforts do we really need to do? What are the gaps? What other ways? What other numbers? What other data might we need to do to get into these models? So that's where it's going. Am I doing that today? No, but that's where it needs to go. We need to say, if such and such happens, like if there's a certain discharge scenario, or whatever scenario you want to come up with, from past data, this and historic data, which is why tapping into that old data is important too. We need to be able to say, here's what we think is going to happen, and maybe here's some scenarios that we might be able to modify things and get a different outcome. Thanks.
Dr. Hansack, one of the things that kept running through my mind as you were giving the presentation about data collection and all that was how a lot of scientists have proprietary information and how they would want to monetize after the fact. And you did touch on it near the end there, that the concern is you're not going to get all the information from a lot of the scientists. How do you see that unfolding, especially from the side of being able to monetize the science and or proprietary information?
Well, first of all, I think that is really changing very, very fast. And I've had a fairly long career. I still got a long career ahead of me. But I think that through time, almost all of the national federal agencies, you have a very strict timeline. You have to make the data available. For everything we're doing in the state of Florida, like the DEP, but pretty much anything we do with the real-time data, it basically is becoming available much, much quicker. I think also just the way society has changed. I think, it's a cultural thing. I think people are really just expecting, everybody wants everything now. And I think that is getting into the science community as well. So I think increasingly you see scientists that will put out something more for the popular audience with some of the information, some of the data. And then the science articles, will come along. There's very few things anymore, I think, that most of us are funded to do that actually are proprietary in terms of environmental. Now that would be different, maybe for medical or biomedical, or biotech or so on. But I think for the environmental side of things, pretty much the mindset now is, we need to make this available. And almost all of NOAA funding, for example, I think it's maximum of 2 years, and they like to get it quicker.
The reason why I ask it from our standpoint is, as political entities, in some cases, when we provide funding for certain things, I'm wondering if we need to add a provision that says, it's open information after the fact.
I think if you don't, you should. I actually thought most of the counties did have that provision. I would definitely encourage all counties to do that. I think if you're getting data and you want to get the data as a deliverable, you want to get the metadata, which is all the backup stuff, like how it was done and, where it was done and how often. And if you don't have data, if there's a gap, explain the data gaps. And this is what we're working on, for a lot of our work. I think we all have to go that direction. So I would strongly encourage, if it's publicly funded research, I'm a strong believer if it's publicly funded research, it should be publicly available data. Now, again, I had a long career and it took me a long time to understand that, okay? Because I also know a lot of people who have retired and they have stuff sitting and their thought is, well, it's my data and I'm eventually going to do something with it. But I think those times have changed.
Thank you, sir.
Other comments, questions? I think what you're doing is essential for us as we confront the restoration effort. We won't fight our way out of this wilderness without the integrated efforts of all of our researchers. And that's to know what we're doing, and then know what did we do, and then what are the applications and outcomes. So what you're doing is vital and essential, and applaud that we move forward on all of that.
I appreciate those very kind words.
Yes, sir. Any other? Item 8, we'll have...
If I could just say one more.
Kathy, sorry.
I think we have copies of this and of both reports that will either are or will be put out in the back for anybody in the audience who'd like them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There is, in the budget, as you look, there was a request, and Dwayne, you may want to address that. There was a request for the 15-16 budget that there be a modification to allow some $25,000 to go for one project, Spoil Island shoreline restoration, and 15 for Wesley's Island native planting, total of $40,000 to be reallocated from anticipated Actually, it was sort of a reserve fund. That's my impression of where it was, in sort of a reserve kind of a fund. And so we're moving it out of that reserve fund into an application so that these monies might be awarded. That was the only thing I saw that was different. Is there, and Chris, you had raised that request.
I just want to give you a little quick background on it. There was a island restoration done in 2013 called Dynamite Point, and some of the challenges that was confronted at that time was the planting in the later months of the year, and that the rains were not there, and trying to bring water out to the island to make sure that the plants could take was a challenge. So there are 2 volunteer adopters of these 2 islands that are indicating a willingness to move forward faster, to mobilize actually together and use the synergy of moving, whether it's being heavy equipment and so on and so forth, to get them out to the islands. They can actually save money and put more into the project as opposed to the mobilization costs. And the other part of that was doing it during the rainy season so that they could actually have a better chance of having those plants be more successful. We planted over 1,100 plants on Dynamite Point back in 2013, and there was probably a 15% drop-off or die rate because of lack of water, and we actually had to carry water out there. So the request is moving it up so they can get the plants in the ground in the rainy season, and that was what the request was.
Both of these projects have been vetted through?
Yes, both projects were on our list.
Okay. And so they're match projects as far as the applicants are coming up?
Yes, each applicant has a significant match to it, including in-kind and cash.
Yeah, okay. Are there other questions about this particular request as associated with the 15-16 budget? We hear a motion for, I think since we're dealing with the budget, I know you say no action required, but I think we have to have action. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I believe in your packet there's Resolution 2016-05. If the board is going to entertain the amendment to the budget, it would be done through approval of that resolution.
All righty. So we're looking for a motion to approve Resolution 2016-05.
Mr. Chairman, I'd
Please.
like to make a motion that we approve that motion.
Been moved, second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Any opposed? That's accepted unanimously. Thank you very much. We go then to item, no, sorry, Frank. You had something else you'd like to tell us?
No, sir, that was great. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Item number 9.
I'm going to move through 2 slides, and then we can address the action items. Congratulations. We've been working very closely, especially the work of Kathy with each of you. We now have a Citizen Advisory Committee identified for the record, and just to remind you that these are dynamic committees, and so should you want to make another appointment, you can. But at this time, in a minute, I'm going to ask you for support to confirm that Citizens Advisory Committee. And for the record, we have individuals now representing each of the counties, and they will serve in an advisory role. But so we didn't lose the volunteers, and we have an incredible group of citizens who wanted to participate with us. We're setting up a community alliance and just the general public. And so we're going to bring those individuals into our information stream, but they will be fact-finding only. And we hope to grow those. You can see the numbers in each of the counties. We had varying levels of interest, but this allows those 4 representatives in each of the county to begin to dive deeper into the community so we have great interactions at the local level. It is our intention as staff to actually begin those Citizen Advisory Committee meetings probably in the late August, September framework. So that's the Citizen Advisory Committee. We have also made some additions to the Management Board. Remember last meeting we discussed the option of bringing the Finance Advisory Committee rather than a standalone committee for efficiency and for integration on the program and finance side, all under the management board level. And so the additional management board appointees are representatives of Space Coast, Treasure Coast League of Cities. We are still waiting from Volusia. They have a meeting coming up, so we'll be bringing that appointee later to you at an upcoming meeting. And then a number of individuals who have been appointed or recommended for appointment who have financial interests in serving on the management board, and we have 5 individuals there. And so we have 2 requested actions from the board. The first is to confirm the Citizens Advisory Committee appointees, and the second part of that is just to direct staff, since we hadn't talked about this role of citizens, to direct us to continue to work with the counties and the communities to build a constituency of local engagement as we begin to reach, down into those communities. We were looking for greater diversity throughout our Indian River Lagoon region. So that is requested action number 1, Mr. Chairman.
That's more pictured as a hub-spoke kind of a relationship, as you have keys that then have sort of connections or oversight over the others, or sort of hub-spoke. That's how I would envision what we're talking about.
That's correct, and just so you know, our intent is those 4 or 5 appointees that you've made are going to have actual work to do, rather than having this just informational, that we're going to be looking to the advisory committee. That is our doorway into the community, and so when we have those meetings, they're going to operate almost as local ambassadors, and the hope is that those numbers of spokes, and it's a good description, are many and very diverse.
Comments, questions about the proposal? We hear a motion to accept the proposal as presented by Executive Director DePriest. It's been moved, seconded. Is it sufficiently clear? Kathy, are you taking the notes on it? Who's taking? You're taking. Are you okay with it? You're okay. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Did we have some
Public comment.
Thank you very much. We have public comment on this request, please. Thank you very much. I see none. There was no comment here. Is there any in opposition? I see none. That's approved unanimously. Thank you, sir.
Item number B on this agenda item is the management board appointees, and our requested action is that the board of directors confirms the additional members of the management board, recognizing that we will establish a finance subcommittee within that management board, and those finance subcommittee members, that will be open. So the idea is that anybody who serves on the management board who so chooses to serve on that subcommittee can, but those additional appointments, many of them were for their specific financial experience and acumen. So we believe we've got a good coverage on the financial. Mr. Chairman, one thing that you did mention a number of meetings ago when we talked about this is looking at some of the giving components. And so we have a couple of gaps still in information and experience there. And so once we see that subcommittee, if staff sees that maybe we need to go out and reach into the nonprofit world for philanthropic major donor development or deferred gifts, we'll go ahead and then come back to you for some recommendations to fill those experience and expertise gaps as needed.
Do we hear a motion to accept staff's recommendation of action?
Move approval.
Been moved and seconded. Kathy, you okay with that? Is what? Okay. Is there public comment? Comment from members? Any in opposition? Accepted unanimously. Yes, sir.
Item number 10, we had a lengthy discussion at our last meeting about communication, contract support, and website development. And in looking at our presentation to you the last meeting, in order to address both your interests and concerns and recommendations, what's before you now is a more traditional RFP process. And so the RFP basically has 6 components. We have a lot of detail, including very specific scope of work issues that you all recommended during our discussion last meeting. but we would establish up to 7-member review committee to review applications. Those rankings would identify the top 3 highest-ranked firms who would then be invited for interviews. Final rankings would be based on that finalist review. And then we would bring our recommendations as information to the management board, and our intent is to do this in the August timeframe. Let them know process, give them, a look at those 3, and then the next day we would come to you with staff recommendation, but you would see those 3 finalists and be able to decide whether you wanted to move forward to contract or some other option depending on the process. So we have a very clear process for you. I think it has benefited from your input from last time. So the request today is to move the RFP release so we can get that on the street, get proposals in the door, begin the review process, and bring this back to you in the August timeframe.
The RFP document proposal is
It's in your package,
in the package.
and it was in your advance.
Mr. Chair,
Okay.
could I just back us up
Yes.
for a moment? I know that item number 9 in our packet shows the Management Board appointees to the Space Coast League of Cities and the Treasure Coast League of Cities, but I didn't hear it in the motion that we just did. Maybe I didn't hear it.
I thought, did you get that motion? I think it was in total. But
Okay.
just for clarification, to make sure we didn't, if you want to just add that in, I believe that you covered that with all the appointees, even though I spent a lot of time on the financial side of it, but I
And
think
it's
your
in our,
motion
it's in
covered
our
all those
pack, it's in our
appointees.
packet. I didn't hear it, and I just wondered if we needed to clarify that.
I think it was staff recommendation is what I understood it to be.
Okay.
So,
I'm
We
good.
okay, Richard?
I'm fine.
We're
Yes.
okay.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right. Okay, on the RFP, do we have a motion to accept the recommendation of staff in issuing the RFP, which would then be vetted and then would be come back to the management board and then the board?
I move approval of staff recommendation.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any comment from public? Any further comment from board? Any wish to? Yes, ma'am. Is there any in opposition? That's accepted unanimously. Yes, sir. Strategic relationship.
The Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council decided, actually I got a phone call from Mike Busha, and he said, we really want to help you. We're going to move a memorandum of understanding, which is also in your package. This memorandum is just a general memoranda that says we want to work with you, we want to provide services as we can. Mike and I have talked a lot about, they have really incredible GIS capabilities there. But also included is temporary office space for me when I'm down south. So, rather than go back and forth on a regular basis, especially these last few weeks, so there were some weeks that I was 4 days in a row down south, that I could just camp at their offices and maybe just stay overnight. And so this has been executed and reviewed, by the board at the Regional Planning Council, and it's before you for signature today. So the requested action is to enter into the memorandum of understanding and ask the chair to sign that memorandum.
Are there any questions of staff about the request?
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman,
sir.
I'm supportive of this, but have we also spoken with the other regional planning council on the northern section of the lagoon?
I have not reached out to East Central Florida, but I intend to. It's
Please.
just been a timing issue.
Are there any other questions to staff on this? Public have comment? Is board,
Approval,
any other
sir.
comment?
Move approval.
It's been moved to approve. Second. It's been moved and seconded. Any in opposition? That's been moved, that's been accepted unanimously. Thank you, sir.
Okay, I've got a number of things. In fact, let me get my other paper. I'm going to do this relatively quickly. I have 5 quick items for update, but the 5th one is an important one. And so the first is that we have talked over the number of months about possible memorandum of understanding with the other national estuary programs and the National Estuarine Research Reserves. After a lot of deliberation and multiple conversations, we have decided to table the memorandum of understanding for a lot of reasons, and mostly for the reason that we didn't feel that we needed an instrument to actually work better together. And so we have communication lines open rather than trying to institutionalize this and what was being perceived as almost like a new organization. We're just going to work together. You know, we're on the phone, we're working with the agencies, and we didn't want to spend any additional time with some questions in Sarasota whether it had value. And so I'll keep you updated, but we've got great working relationships with all partners. Number 2 is there's an invitation in your package which I received yesterday. I think some of you already know from Congressman Patrick Murphy. Apparently he has an event in Washington, D.C. next week. I think some of you are going. In light of the work that you just assigned to staff, I'm going to let you represent with the chairs, you know, and your deliberation today, but unless you want me there, my intention is to work through the week and not go up to D.C., but I'll do whatever you direct. So I'm looking for a little guidance on that one, since many of you, I think some of you are planning to be up there.
I do want us to recognize, please, that Member Gilmore has taken the chair, please. Yes. Yes, are there questions, comments, suggestions? That's what I was asking. How in the world are we going to have the time to get that done?
Well, you know, there's only so much time. You got to put it where it's most useful, and I think
I'm agreeing with that. Yes, sir.
I would only ask Dr. DeFries, you know, do you think you can gain additional insight? We've heard from members of the board that they want specifics. And so if you were to be there, what specifics, you know, should they be expecting? We're going to meet with Army Corps. We're going to meet with some of the members of Congress. And as part of that development opportunity, what exactly, I know the board was saying very clearly that they wanted to have specifics so that they would be able to be respectful of what we're trying to accomplish and vice versa. So I don't know if you don't gain some insight from those congressional type hearings that we'd be a part.
I think it would be useful insight, but whether my presence would influence, I think most of those issues are already on the table. I think most of the direct, the specificity of the resolutions and the letters are clear. You know, the IFAS report really almost outlines it scientifically. So I don't honestly believe that my presence, you know, will make any additional value to that group interaction. But, you know, I serve you, so if you want me to participate, I'm happy to do so. But that will take 3 days out of next week. Well, 2 at the least, because I'll have to fly up the day before, and you know, it'll be a late night coming back. And you'll see in a minute why I'm concerned about time. I'm going to add another piece of big work onto staff's schedule here in a second.
You're a glutton for punishment.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for guidance from me, I'll certainly defer to your judgment, but what I'm hearing is, and I agree, I mean, we're in crisis mode, certainly in the southern part of the system, and with everything going on, it's kind of boots on the ground, but if you say it's critical for you to be in Washington, I would support your decision there.
I'm actually asking you. I think probably there's enough representation up there from Florida that my presence is not going to be any significant added benefit because of the players who are already at the table representing us very well, including the commissioner.
Yeah, then I think you've been a good resource for me to pick up the phone, and you're like, I'm here, I'm there, I'm seeing it, you know, and I think you're, and again, with everything we have in front of us that you're tasked with doing, you know, close to home.
Here you have direction?
I do. Just as an information piece, in August I will be meeting with Senator Negron at his request. I know a number of people are going up to Tallahassee, and I'll be doing the same, addressing some of the statewide issues. And so the action that you had us do earlier will give us specific guidance for that meeting, so that will be useful. Number 4, we've already talked about. The STEM AC meets July 26. This is not going to be general information. Our legal counsel will do a quick brief on Sunshine, but then we're going to put them right to work. And 2 of those issues are the boundary amendment request from Volusia County. We are going to have them literally rank the 22 action items in the CCMP, which will give us some guidance as to where the scientist thinks the big bang for the buck is. Among those, the first 2, 3, 4, 5 of those is where we'll start CCMP discussions. And so we are also going to ask, and this is going to come to you too, so I want you to think about this. We are going to ask the entire management conference, if you were, king for a day and there were 3 transformational decisions that you would make, what would those be? And so I want to get that sense. And this is more your executive director wanting to get a sense now that we've finally seated our management board, which, by the way, congratulations, that is a big step for an NEP. What is our collective understanding of priorities? And we'll begin to start looking in that data. And as we go into this next year, we're going to know exactly where we're headed. And some of the directive you gave us today is going to get it even finer detail in that. And lastly, now I'm going to ask you for some direction. And I want to give you a very brief kind of position of mine. I have been informed, and I've done a full look at this, that there is about $8.5 million available from National Marine Fisheries and NOAA. Commissioner Zadowski made a comment about restoration. It has been my feeling for a long time that we are not prepared, either locally or throughout the lagoon, to deal with the restoration needs that are about to occur. And those restoration needs range everything from some of the restoration that's part of restoration. So putting filter feeders back in the system is really a restoration action. We may be looking at fish stock enhancement, but before that we're going to be looking at seagrasses, living shorelines. These are components that each of your counties, the state agencies, all know they're important. So there's a short timeline on this. It's a August 16th deadline. Of that $8.5 million that's available, the general window for opportunity for ecosystem restoration grants is between $100,000 minimum and $750 on average. And so this is what I want to propose, and I will need some direction from you on this. I believe we can put together a very competitive proposal on this with partners. I see our existing infrastructure at Marine Discovery Center in Volusia, Brevard Zoo and its partners at Marine Resources Council, Florida Institute of Technology, and a number of others who are doing restoration work right now is kind of center number 2. Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institution, and all of these have access to either delivery systems or seawater systems, but Harbor Branch and its partners, and then Florida Oceanographic Society down south. And we are actually funding a number of restoration projects proposed in our 2016-2017 budget. And being the old professor that I am, when I see $8.5 million, my DNA is going, write a proposal. The timeline is short, and I will not have the time, nor will we, to be able to bring it back to you. And so here is the concept that I see, that we bring these teams together, and I've already talked to them in general, and we set up a match program using the dollars we've already appropriated for next year that are in restoration, and that would be our local match. So we're not going to change our work plan. We're not encumbering any additional dollars. And that will stretch the vision of this proposal, which may or may not be accepted by NOAA, to look at capacity building within this infrastructure. Maybe a combination of capital expansion at some of these sites to handle the ability to do more work. Some of it may be just expanding a couple of our projects to have a bigger footprint. The hurdles here, the timeline is short. It's a complicated proposal. One of the caveats and requirements in order to propose is that we would need a letter of support from the governor. in order to actually make this proposal. And for me, you know, the stopgaps are, the first question which will be in my hands is, do we have a competitive proposal? Is it tight scientifically? And then can we get support from the governor in a letter to make that proposal valuable? If in fact we are lucky enough, because these are highly competitive national grants, to get an award, then we would be coming back with that, you know, documentation to you for acceptance and getting into that agreement with NOAA, National Marine Fisheries. And so my idea is to seek $1 million to match it with as much of our money that appropriately aligns. But what I'm looking for is, if you give me the go-ahead, then we're going to get on the ground and start moving this. And it will be literally at my decision point. If the science doesn't look right to me, we won't submit a weak proposal. But if it's strong, we're going to move it to submission by that deadline. And the difficulty is that you won't get to see the full proposal. We can send you out drafts individually, but you won't see it collectively until we either get an acceptance, which would be a great, surprise, because this is going to be tough, or a rejection, in which case we can look at our weaknesses and come back in the next year's cycle and go at it again. And so I need some direction, because this is, we're talking about not, a few hours, but, several, maybe 100 hours of mainly my time to drive this. And I think we have something that's kind of innovative that might actually catch their eye.
Richard?
Yes. Dwayne, if I understand correctly, then what you're saying is we've got projects in the hopper that we've already approved that kind of meet the criteria of this extra grant that you're seeking, and we're trying to put that together and get another
That's correct.
pot of money for that.
Excuse me. We're going to leverage the projects that we've already looked at that have those restoration components. And there's some very specific directives about coastal resiliency, climate change, weather events, endangered species, fisheries. And so we'll have to look where those matches fit our restoration projects already planned for next year. And that will be our match. So there'll be no additional dollars, no change in the work plan as we've envisioned it, but we'll be just leveraging out for that match.
And how would you bring in the other folks that are requesting the money? Because you'd have somebody that says, okay, we're going to do 1,000 oyster mats, and now we get money to do 2,000 oyster mats. I guess.
This is why the workload is going to be largely on me, that we're going to need to take what has been kind of individual project-oriented activities and build a capacity, a vision for a restoration alliance within the NEP, because these are partners already within our framework. Many of them are in our management board. And we're going to look at this from a holistic delivery system where instead of every year somebody wants to do a fish hatchery, or every year somebody wants to say, well, we're going to plant seagrasses for this project. I see this, and this is where, I don't know that NOAA is actually going to think this is a good idea, because they're used to focusing on what we do. They're looking for shovel-ready. Tell us how many acres of oysters or how many acres of seagrasses you've replanted. So I think we're going to have to find a very clear and business-oriented and scientifically defensible and sustainable. I talked to Tom a little bit about this. The sustainability of an infrastructure is really important. So, we've got 4 weeks plus to do this. It's a lot to ask, especially with the response, the emergency response. But we really don't have anything to lose. And if we can put this together and generate $1 million in matching funds, that would be a big coup. And it is federal match. And I can't imagine any place more deserving of some restoration money than us right now. But it's not an easy proposal that I'm contemplating.
Please.
Thank you.
And Dwayne, as you know, when we talked about this, one of the concerns with anything getting into a project or a grant that I have when I look at it is, what's the sustainability of that? You know, what's the long-term cost? Am I, you know, getting a grant now, but then I'm going to have to pick up stuff, you know, in year 2, 3, or 4? So I'm still struggling a little bit with what exactly are the projects that are going to be in here. You know, is it expanding, you know, the number of oyster mats out there, or is it expanding facilities, you know, to be able to, you know, have the hatcheries basically in the future? And can we do that with this $1 million, or are we going to have, you know, one of the 4 facilities we can get, you know, we can build onto it, but we can't actually furnish it, and they're going to have to somehow find the dollars to be able to put the infrastructure in, you know, in year 2 or 3 or 4. So that's part of it. And then I guess my other question is this an annual grant from NOAA? Is it
No, this is,
an
well,
opportunity?
it's
So
an
this is a
annual
one-time-
grant, but of course, as you know, it's always you know, it depends on appropriations.
Right.
You know, and so they've had these on a regular basis year to year. If we miss this cycle, we wait a year.
Right.
And so that's, the delay of time is really the only thing we risk. Each of these 4 sites that I mentioned, and there may be some others I need to reach out to partner, all have, you know, outstanding long-term efforts in this area. And so it's very possible that this doesn't go CapEx and it all goes to expanded projects. But this is the only chance I have to get your, you know, either yay or nay, move forward on it. And we're going to have to literally ask those questions of those partners to see where match dollars most leverage, where the science is the strongest, and where we are the most competitive for this grant. I think there's a probability, or at least a chance, that we look at it and we get 2 weeks into this and maybe decide to table it on our own because we don't feel like we're strong enough scientifically. But we're going to run down, you know, a fair amount of staff and their time to get to that point. But I do think with that kind of money on the table, I would have been remiss not to bring it to your attention and to let you know that that piece of me, that DNA, is vibrating when I see, you know, the possibility of $1 million match somewhere.
Let's do explore the possibility that FOS has facilities that might fit the criteria that you've suggested.
I've actually talked to all 4 facilities,
Okay.
and they all super excited to have the discussion. But remember, if you give me a go-ahead today, other than me being able to supply you with kind of individual information on where we are, you in effect will be authorizing me to write that proposal and submit it, you know, if we can get governor letter of support. You know, that will be, and I can't get to the governor until I get a good way down the road to understand exactly what the details of this request would be.
That was Florida Oceanographic. I didn't hear you mention them. Maybe
Yes,
you
I did.
had. Okay, sorry, excuse me.
Do we need a motion?
Well, it's just a direction, just get a sense of direction. Is this, yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I have full confidence in Dr. DeFries, and with your vast experience and why we even hired you, is to give us direction, the opportunity to understand what it is you want to try to accomplish, and your talents and your experience will give us the opportunity to be the benefactors of your work. That said, I'd like to move forward with the opportunity for Dr. DeFries to entertain the grant and move forward with it if he felt that the grant was sufficient in all levels to be successful.
So that's a motion.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there further discussion of the board? Is there public discussion? Anyone in opposition? That's passed unanimously. Yes, sir.
Just one other point, so you're aware, and it's on the record, I have international travel plans that are going to overlap your next meeting. I'm going to make sure I have everything front-loaded for August for you. From the sounds of this next month's workload, I may actually need that trip, but I wanted to just make you aware that if you have issues coming up that you think will come on board in August, let's address those early with staff and make sure we're prepared both for that management board meeting and for the council meeting. And thank you. And I will keep you all posted on this proposal, so I can send you just updates so you can see where we're at. And that both of those actions will start immediately.
Good.
Thank you.
Frank, you have? Kathy, you have? Yes, ma'am. Management Board, Dwayne, was there any report from Management Board?
I don't think we received anything from the Management Board. Marty?
No, you're good. But we'll start down that way if you wish.
Thank you, sir. I just want to thank Dr. Freeze for having come to St. Lucie County's Board of County Commissioner meeting this past Tuesday. After a review of the meeting Martin County had in their emergency, it's understandable that the public is very angry, and some of the comments, while the anger is very fresh, especially those living within the confines of the immediate emergency, I found that it was a little disturbing that some of the content was directed at individuals. That said, I worked with our staff to create and develop a presentation of all the things that St. Lucie County has been able to do in cooperation with the different entities, FDEP, South Florida Water Management District, the issues team, all of the levels of cooperation that we have been able to achieve in the last few years. Some $15 million in projects that have removed over 80,000 pounds of contaminants from the system. So there are successes. And that particular day, we were entertaining the declaration of emergency. So we expected to have a crowd of very angry folks come in, and there were sufficient folks that were there, but we were able to educate the public on things that we have been doing, the investments that we've been making, and it really made a big difference for the audience at home, watching on television, and those who were in the audience. So our experience was very positive, and thank you, Dwayne, for your part of the presentation, because it really brought the vitriol down in the meeting. And I would just reflect that upon each of you who hold these meetings, is to talk about the successes that each entity has had, to show that we are doing things. The general public doesn't often know, some of these programs take 3, 4, 5, 6. One case, you were there for the grand opening, or the groundbreaking of the Indian Hills project, which is now phase 2 complete, 8 years to complete. But they're showing the positive return on the investment and removing contaminants from the system. So I just wanted to share that with you and tell you what a great executive director you have in Dr. DeFries, and thank you again, Dwayne.
Good. Thank you, sir. Tom, did you have?
I just wanted to thank Dr. Hennesek and Dr. Jacoby and also Ms. Drum. I think she left, but for their presentations. And just to add to Ms. Drum's discussion about the what truly is an unprecedented and tragic situation here. She was right on with a lot of the activities that need to go on down here in the lagoon, the boots on the ground, as we talked about before, but just to update you on what the interactions that DEP are doing, currently. As Ms. Drum mentioned, last week the governor came out and, had a declaration, the emergency declaration, but also with that directed DEP to, I would say, double down on its monitoring efforts, get more staff, more boots on the ground out there, which we have done. We've also tried to increase the time and communication back to the public about the toxicity or the concerns in this area. I know that's a very difficult conversation. I think still the best course of action is, if you see it, stay away. Don't let any animals, anything, regardless of what the toxin analysis is. But we've really moved to try and increase the timing to get that information to the health departments and to the local entities so they can take action. Also, late last week and early this week, the cleanup efforts has one that we're in that same situation. I think that everybody is. This is unprecedented. We do not have staff and folks who are used to dealing with this, and there's a lot of concerns. As the commissioner mentioned, there's health concerns from sending staff down there and actually doing this. As you gather this up, can be aerosols and things that really can have some health concerns going forward. So that's a concern. But probably the biggest thing is what to do with the waste, what to do with the algae once you get it out of the system. And I think there's some excellent ideas out there about using it for energy or other areas, but that's really a concern that the department is looking at, because we're under the, we don't want to do more harm than good with a lot of these actions, or cause more issues in the lagoon itself and the estuary. So that's something we've been looking at. We engaged a number of folks earlier in the week. I would say vendors who've come forward. As Ms. Drum said, there's 30 plus. We had a few that came forward that either didn't have the ability to mobilize quickly. A number of them told us it would be 3 or 4 weeks to be able to get out to the sites, which I think everybody would agree is just not an acceptable, time period at this point. That may be part of the response, but really we need something that can happen now. Other folks had chemicals that they were willing to sell to us, but they didn't have staff or anybody to tell us how to deal with that. It's just pour the chemicals in. They couldn't tell us what it was going to do. So we really had to step back and, engage the EPA and their national expertise. There's been a lot of efforts in the Ohio area. Lake Erie is one of the famous areas right now where a lot of these algal response teams have been working. So we've been engaging with them to help us identify what is the best and quickest way we can do this. So we have a team that's forming that includes EPA federal partners, it includes local partners with the water management districts, and we want to include the affected counties as well. That is being formed, this week as we speak. Part of that is also to be able to expedite our permitting process, so we can do the due diligence to make sure that we're not doing any harm. We have that ability to expedite that under the governor's emergency order, but there are still questions we need to ask, especially on this disposal side, because we can't have somebody who's just said, well, I'm just going to suck it out and then just dump it right on the streets. That's just not an acceptable route. So we've been looking a lot at that, and hopefully we'll have some solutions very, very quickly, working in partnership. Again, I think this has been really an effort, as Ms. Drum mentioned, and we all recognize, at all levels of government and all levels of response. And we just continue to work towards that. I know we have been working along with you all locally to try and speed up some of the federal response. I've had conversations with the EPA and water directors, both at the region and also at headquarters to move that. And as you mentioned, I know that there's efforts to try and get President Obama and the administration to move forward more quickly as well. So.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
I'll just hit it briefly from a water management standpoint, and it starts in the north. Under the governor's emergency order, we're holding as much as we can up in the Kissimmee Basin, not just the Kissimmee River, but also the Kissimmee Chain of Lakes, taking advantage of any freeboard that we have there, really challenging those regulation schedules while balancing it against our obligation for flood control. That's working, moving south through the system. Water conservation areas are all full. We're pushing water as hard and fast as we can through the bottom of the system, but it is at capacity. And then on the both estuary sides, we're engaging the private sector as well. It was mentioned earlier about FP&L and bringing their holding reservoir in Indiantown online and engaging with landowners that have capacity, pumping capacity to pull water out of the system. So it's literally a day-by-day, hour-by-hour exercise. And for the first time yesterday in a long time, inflows into the lake have actually recessed below our ability to get it out. In other words, it's neutralized, it's not gaining. So we're starting to pick up. Mother Nature's had a lot to do with that, these high temperatures, this lack of rainfall. So we're now getting outfalls as of yesterday. Outflows are above inflows, and that's a positive.
Thank you, sir. That's certainly good. I think we're at war, and it's here, we feel it, we're distressed, we're really focused. But water quality all over the state, really, we're at war about. And so in thinking through that, because there's been a lot of times at night, that's what we do, we can't go to sleep, so we're thinking about stuff. And it seems to me that a potential structure this is just talk, but this is potential, would be along the lines of how we do our roads, our highway system, because highway systems are designed to meet the needs of the expanding public. So if we viewed it similarly to that there are monies that come from the federal, they come into the state DOT. State has districts set up. The districts have local TPOs, transportation, and MPOs, metropolitan planning organizations. That then allows us to have these 5-year, 10-year, 20, you're familiar with okay, with these planning cycles. It allows us to have these funding cycles. It allows us then to have local input. It certainly enhances the design effort and the application of the scientific approach to roads and bridges and all of these things. This might be applicable. Not today. Today we've got a disaster. But this might be applicable to how we set up structure to start addressing our global as far as Florida, global water disaster. This might be an approach. And anyhow, I'm just pitching that out.
Well, we've had an awful lot of profound information delivered today. We've had a lot of profound statements made by staff and folks up here, so I'm not going to bore anybody with what I have to say. I have no report.
Doug?
No further comments, Mr. Chairman.
Richard?
Ditto.
Doug?
Yeah, just real quickly, looking at this from 30,000 feet, South Florida Water Management District is one of the largest pump systems in the world, and it's flat. The St. Johns River falls all of 20 feet from Blue Cypress to Jacksonville, 20 feet, over 200 miles. So we've got what we're dealing with is a system that's been in place since World War I, and it's archaic. It needs to be changed. I'm so thankful we've got this group together now to deal with this, because I'm thinking back to when I sat with Hans Tansler when St. John's controlled the Lagoon funding, and very little of it. We couldn't have done anything. And I'm so thankful, Mr. Chairman, that everybody, all the group here and all the counties had the foresight to sit down and go, this lagoon needs this help, and thank God we're here, we're structured, and we're moving down the road, and we have the talented staff we have. So I'm just thankful. I've worked my whole life on water management issues since I got out of grad school, and I think this one, for my life, the most significant group I've served on, because it's my backyard. I've lived along Lagoon for 55 years. My kids are raised on it like Kevin's, and for my own lifestyle, this lagoon's health is more important to me than anything. So I'm so thankful we have this group and your leadership and the staff that we have sitting in front of us. Thank you.
We will have an emergency meeting to address the letter that will be composed, but the next scheduled meeting is August the 12th. 9:30, St. Lucie County Commission Chambers. St. Lucie County Commission Chambers, August the 12th. And that's in Fort Pierce. Yes. I hear nothing else. We are adjourned.